Welcome back to Harry's Verse. Today's story asks a single dark question. What if Harry Potter was left for dead and rose as an immortal force of magic? If you haven't yet, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a new adventure never slips past you. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The quiet vote. The fire in the grate at number 12 had gone out 3 days ago, and Harry had not bothered to relight it the ordinary way. He sat in the chair his godfather used to sit in the long room with the moth-eaten curtains, and he watched the cold hearth the way other men watched the rain. The house was quiet around him. It had been quiet for a long time. Creature had died the previous winter properly and peacefully in the cupboard he loved, and Harry had buried him under the rose bushes in the back garden because there was no one left who would have thought it strange. The portraits had stopped screaming at him months ago. Even Walburga Black, behind her ratty velvet, had gone silent when he walked the halls, as though the painted dead had decided he was not worth the breath they did not have. He looked at the dead coals, and the dead coals remembered fire. It was not a spell. That was the part he had stopped explaining to himself. There had been a time 2 years and a war ago when a man relit a fire by drawing his wand and saying a word and meaning it, and the meaning ran down his arm into the wood and out, and the wood obeyed. There was still a wand in his sleeve. He still said the words sometimes, out of an old courtesy, the way you might knock on the door of a house you owned. But the meaning did not need the wand now, and it had stopped needing the word, and lately it had stopped needing him to mean it very hard. He looked at the coals and thought without heat burn, and the coals took the thought the way dry grass takes a match. Light climbed the chimney, the room warmed. On the mantel, the photograph of his parents stirred in its frame, his mother's hand lifting to her mouth, his father grinning at someone out of view. Harry watched the fire he had made out of an idle thought and felt the thing he had stopped having a word for. Not pride. Pride was for men who could still be surprised by themselves. It sat in his chest like a swallowed coin, cold and heavy and his. The war had ended on a May morning in a ruined courtyard, and the world had cheered, and then the world had gone home. He had been 19. He was 21 now, or near enough that the difference had stopped mattering, and in the space between he had learned a thing nobody warned the survivors about, that the war was the easy part. The war had a shape. It had a man at the center of it with a flat nose and red eyes, and when you killed that man the shape collapsed and everyone could see the sky again. What came after had no shape at all. What came after was the slow discovery that the people you had bled beside in the dark were afraid of you in the daylight, and that they were too polite or too grateful or too ashamed to say so. He had not noticed it at first. That was the thing he would turn over later, in the long years he did not yet know were coming. He had not noticed because he had not been looking. He had been tired in a way that sleep did not touch, and he had let the tiredness fill the place where suspicion used to live. The last Sunday he had gone to the burrow had been in the early spring, 4 months back, and he could call it up whole if he let himself, which he tried not to do. It had been the same crooked house and the same long table and the same smell of Molly's roast filling the garden, and for the length of the walk up the lane he had let himself believe it would be the way it used to be. Then he had opened the gate and the talk in the kitchen had stopped, not all at once. It had thinned the way a room of birds goes quiet when a shadow crosses the window, one voice trailing off and then the next, until by the time he reached the door there was only Molly saying, "Harry, dear, you came too bright," both her hands working a tea towel that did not need working. They had all been glad to see him. That was the part that he could not get his teeth into afterward. Every one of them had been honestly glad, and every one of them had gone careful at the same time, the careful you go around a man holding something that might come apart. Bill's eldest had been there, Victoire not yet 2, and Harry had picked her up the way he had picked her up 100 times, and she had taken one look at his face and started to scream. Not cry. Scream the way children scream at a noise too low for adults to hear, and she had twisted in his hands and reached past him for her mother, and Fleur had taken her with a smile stretched tight over something else, and said it was the teeth coming in, and everyone had agreed at once that it was the teeth. He had caught Hermione watching him across the table while Molly carved. She had looked away when he met her eyes down to her plate, and he had thought she was tired. She had been doing the sums even then, 4 months out, with the gravy going cold in front of her. He knew that now. He had not known it then. Ron had spent the meal talking too loudly about the shop and the new house and the baby coming, and had not once asked Harry a question, and only George had thrown a roll at his head across the table and called him a miserable git and grinned, and for a moment it had almost been all right. He had left before the pudding. He had walked back down the lane in the failing light, and he had told himself it was nothing, that families went strange and shy, and that he was strange and shy himself these days, and he had not let the other thing form into a sentence in his head, because once it was a sentence he would have to do something about it. He had not gone back. They had not asked him to. That was the last time, though no one in the garden had known to make it count, and he had spent the walk home telling himself a comfortable lie, which was the same thing in the end that they had all been telling themselves around the table. The owl came at 6:30 while the new fire was still settling. It came down the chimney rather than the window, which should have told him something, because ministry owls came down the chimney when the ministry did not want a delivery seen from the street. It was a handsome gray bird with the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement on its leg, and it waited on the back of Sirius's chair with its yellow eyes fixed on him while he broke the wax. "Mr. Potter," the letter said, in the small, careful hand of someone's undersecretary. "The minister requests your attendance this evening at the Ministry of Magic on a matter of the highest sensitivity." A remnant of the conflict has surfaced in the Department of Mysteries, and the unspeakables have asked for you by name. An escort will call for you at 8 o'clock. Your discretion is assumed. E. Pike, Minister for Magic. Harry read it twice. The owl watched him read it. A matter of the highest sensitivity, a remnant of the conflict. The unspeakables had asked for him by name. Every line of it was built to be the kind of thing he could not refuse and could not repeat, and he noticed the architecture of it the way you notice a well-made trap a half-second before you understand that it is a trap and not a door. He noticed it, and he set the noticing aside because he had been setting that particular noticing aside for 2 years, and the habit had grooves now. He thought of Teddy. That was the lever, and a part of him knew it was the lever even as it worked. His godson was 4 years old and lived with Andromeda in a cottage outside the village where the war had not reached, and every refusal Harry made, every door he did not walk through, every owl he did not answer was another small confirmation that the savior of the wizarding world had gone strange and cold and would not come when he was called. He could feel them counting it. The prophet counted it in print. Where is Harry Potter? They had asked twice now, with a photograph of the locked front door of a house no one could see, the boy who vanished. If he did not go tonight, it would be in the paper by Thursday that he had refused the minister, and Andromeda would read it over the porridge, and one day Teddy would be old enough to read it too, so he would go, not because the letter had fooled him. Because the cost of treating it as a trap was paid by a 4-year-old, and the cost of treating it as a door was paid only by himself, and he had been paying his own costs alone for so long that it no longer felt like a sacrifice. It felt like arithmetic. He fed the owl a strip of cold bacon and watched it go back up the chimney, and then he sat with the letter in his lap and let the fire burn and did the thing he was good at, which was to be ready for the worst without letting it touch his face. By 7:30 he had washed and dressed in the plain dark coat he wore when he wanted to be looked through rather than at. He checked his wand out of courtesy. He did not bring the cloak. He thought about it standing in the hall with the trunk open, and he decided against it, and he never afterward decided whether that had been instinct or pride or the simple weariness of a man who had stopped believing he needed to hide. The cloak stayed in the trunk. Stone was where it had been since the forest, lost in the leaf mold of a place he could have found in his sleep and had chosen never to find. The wand in his sleeve was holly and phoenix feather mended his own. He did not carry the other one. He had put the other one back where it belonged and meant to leave it there, and the irony of that he had given away the only one of the 3 the world believed in and kept only the 2 it had forgotten, was a joke that would take him decades to find funny. The escort came at 8. There were 2 of them, Aurors in the gray field robes that had replaced the old red after the war, and Harry knew the senior one. His name was Pratip Savage, and he had fought at the Battle of Hogwarts, had held the North Stair with Harry for 20 minutes against a tide of snatchers, and Harry had pulled a chunk of falling masonry off his legs with a banishing charm, and Savage had said, "I owe you one," Potter with blood in his teeth, and laughed. Savage did not laugh now. He stood on the doorstep with the rain starting behind him, and he would not quite look at Harry's face. "Evening," Harry said. "Mr. Potter." Savage's voice was correct and flat. "We're to bring you in by flew from the leaky minister's orders. It's all a bit sensitive, sir. Sir, 2 years ago it had been Potter, and before that Harry, and Savage had a daughter named after a phoenix and had shown Harry the moving photograph of her in the mess at 3 in the morning. Now it was sir, and the man could not look at him, and his right hand had not strayed an inch from his wrist the whole time he stood there." Harry looked at the hand. He looked at the place where the second Auror stood, a half step too far back, angled wrong, the angle a man takes when he wants a clear line and does not want it to be obvious that he wants a clear line. He looked at Savage's eyes, which were fixed on the brass number 12 nailed to the door, and he understood in the cold, complete way he understood most things now that Pratip Savage knew what was waiting at the other end of this errand and was ashamed of it and was going to do it anyway. He could have closed the door. The thought presented itself, neat and whole. He could have closed the door and let the wards take the street, and these 2 men could explain to Pike why the errand had failed, and Harry could be in the cottage outside the village by midnight with Teddy asleep upstairs and Andromeda pretending not to be glad. He could have done that. He thought of the prophet on Thursday. He thought of the arithmetic. "Let me get my coat," Harry said, though he was already wearing it, and Savage flinched at the small mercy of being given a moment, and Harry stepped back into the dark hall and stood there for the length of 3 breaths with his hand flat against the old wallpaper. The house knew houses like this one knew things. The wallpaper was warm under his palm where it had no business being warm, and somewhere above him a door he had not touched in months eased itself shut, the way a living thing draws in its limbs. He had time in those 3 breaths to take the wand from his sleeve and put it in his hand, and he did. He had time to fetch the cloak from the trunk 8 feet away, and he did not. He would carry that later, through more years than the language had numbers for. 8 feet 3 breaths. He left it in the trunk and walked out into the rain. The leaky cauldron was empty when they came through, which it never was at 8:30 on a Tuesday, and the emptiness was the second thing. Tom the barman was not behind the bar. The fire in the public grate had been built up green and waiting. Savage gestured at it with the flat of his hand, the courtesy of a man holding a door he intends to lock, and Harry stepped into the green flame and said Ministry of Magic Atrium and let the flu take him, because the alternative was to start the fight here in a pub 2 miles from where his godson slept, and he had not yet decided that the fight was unavoidable. He had decided it was likely. He had decided to walk a little further into the trap to see its hinges. The 2 were not the same. The atrium was wrong. He had stood in it 100 times in the press and noise of the morning rush, the fireplaces flaring, the golden fountain that Pike had commissioned to replace the one the war destroyed throwing its endless thread of water. Tonight it was empty and the lights were low and the fountain had been stilled, the water hanging in a frozen arc, and the only sound was the click of his own boots on the dark stone and the soft displaced air of two more oarers stepping out of the fireplaces behind him to stand between him and the way back. Four now, Savage and the Silent One and these two. Harry counted them without turning his head. He had learned to count in the war and he had not unlearned it. On the wall by the lift gate someone had pinned the evening edition of the Prophet, the way they pinned the paper in every ministry corridor so the clerks would know what they were meant to think. Harry read the headline across the empty atrium without trying to. ROBRDS, AUROR reform to meet new THRATS. It said over a photograph of the head of the office looking grave at a lectern, and below it in smaller type, a year on, is the wizarding world safe? He knew the genre. It had been running for months, a steady low drip of it, never naming him, never quite. Concerns have been raised, sources within the department, the question of unregulated power, the lessons of history. Pike had built a whole weather system out of words that committed no one to anything, and the country had stood out in the rain of it long enough that nobody could remember when the sky had last been clear. And somewhere in the closed rooms of the Wisengamot it had finally come down as a vote. Harry had read every one of those articles in the quiet of the house and had told himself they were about a danger that was not him. It was a useful lie. He had a collection of them. He kept them the way other men kept a drawer of broken watches, meaning one day to fix them, never doing it. The lift took him down with a rattle and a sigh, and the four oarers rode with him in silence, and the wrongness thickened the lower they went, past level 2 in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, past the courtrooms, down to the very bottom where the corridor ran black and unmarked toward the only door in the ministry that had no plaque, the Department of Mysteries. He had been here once before at 15 on a night that had cost him the only family he had left, and the corridor smelled exactly the same, cold stone and something underneath it, something that was not quite a smell, a kind of held breath in the dark. The door opened before he reached it. The round room beyond was as he remembered, the blue-flamed candles, the dozen identical black doors, the floor that turned so that you could not be sure which door you had come in by. A man stood in the center of it. He was small and gray and entirely ordinary, the way the most dangerous people in any government are entirely ordinary, and he wore the deep green of the Department of Mysteries with the air of a clerk who had followed the universe and found it wanting. "Mr. Potter," he said, "I am Croker, we've not met, thank you for coming." "You asked for me by name," Harry said. "The letter said, did it?" Croker's eyes were the color of pond ice. "Yes, I suppose it did." The door behind Harry closed. The room began very slowly to turn. "There's no remnant, is there?" Harry said. It was not really a question. He let it stand in the cold air and watched the small gray man decide how much truth to spend. "There's a great deal that is remnant, Mr. Potter," Croker said. "You, for instance, the war made a number of things it did not know how to put away afterward. We are the department that puts things away." He inclined his head, almost kind. "This way, please, the minister is waiting." He felt, we all felt, that you deserved to hear it from him. One of the dozen doors had stopped in front of Harry, and it was the door he remembered, the one that led down to the stone amphitheater and the dais and the thing that stood on the dais. He knew it before Croker opened it. He could feel it through the wall, the way you feel a draft from a room you cannot see into, a thin cold pull on something behind his sternum. The death chamber, the veil, he should have run then. He understood that later with the clarity of a man who had decades to understand it. There was still a half-second, standing in the round room with the candles burning blue, when the wand was in his hand, and his magic was a thing the lower ministry could not have held in a bottle, and he could have torn the lift out of its shaft and walked up the cable into the night. He did not run because running meant he had decided, and deciding meant he believed it of them. And there was a part of Harry Potter that had decided 2 years ago that he would rather walk into the worst the world could do than be the man who believed the worst of the people he loved before they had said it to his face. So he walked through the door and down the worn stone steps into the sunken chamber, and there at the bottom, around the dais where the tattered veil swayed in a wind that came from nowhere, were the rest of them. Minister Eldon Pike stood at the foot of the dais with his hands folded in front of him. He was a tall, narrow man with a politician's silver hair and a face built for the careful expression of regret, and he wore it now, the regret, like a well-cut coat. Beside him stood Gawain Robards, head of the Auror office, broad and gray and grim, with a dozen of his people ranged in a loose arc up the chamber's lower tiers, wands out, faces shut. And in the front of that arc, where Harry's eyes went and stayed, stood two people he had carried out of more fires than he could number. Ron would not meet his eyes, that was the first thing. Ron stood with his arms folded and his jaw working and his gaze fixed somewhere around Harry's collarbone, and the freckles stood out on a face gone the color of old paper. He had his wand in his hand. He held it the way a man holds something he has been given and does not want, low and loose, pointed at the floor, and he would not lift his eyes. Hermione met his eyes, that was the second thing, and it was worse. She stood very straight with her chin up and her wand held ready and her face arranged into the particular expression Harry had seen her wear before the hardest decisions of the war, the expression of a person who has done the sums twice and does not like the answer and is going to act on it anyway. There were tears standing in her eyes and not falling. She had been crying before he came in. She had stopped so that she could do this with a clear head. "Hello, Harry," she said. The chamber turned its cold breath over all of them. The veil swayed. High above, the blue candles of the round room threw a little light down the stairwell, and it died before it reached the floor. Well, Harry said, this is a lot of people for a remnant. Pike cleared his throat. Mr. Potter, Harry, I want you to understand that this gives no one here any pleasure. That's a strange thing to lead with, Harry said. If it's true, there has been a review, Pike said. The careful regret did not waver, but his hands tightened on each other, knuckle over knuckle. A confidential review conducted at the highest level into the question of you, into what you have become. You will forgive me if I am blunt, we are past the hour for anything else. You are not what you were when the war ended, Mr. Potter. The unspeakables have measured it. Your magic has not settled the way a man settles as he ages. It has grown. It is still growing. Mr. Croker's instruments cannot find the top of it, and Mr. Croker's instruments measured the Dark Lord at the height of his power and found his top easily. He drew a breath. You light fires without a wand, Harry. You mend wards no one taught you to mend. A house that should have killed any other man who slept in it has accommodated you. You are 21 years old, and there is no living wizard who can stand against you, and in 10 years or 20 there will be no dead one either. We are not blind. We watched what affection and fear did to Albus Dumbledore, a better man than any of us, and we have decided, the Wisengamot has decided in closed session this afternoon that we cannot afford to find out what it does to you. It was, Harry thought, a remarkably honest speech for a man who had begun by lying about a remnant. He turned it over. He looked at the dozen oars in the stilled water 200 feet above and the gray ice of Croker's patient eyes, and he looked last at his two best friends, and he said the only thing that mattered. And you agreed with this. He was looking at Ron when he said it. Ron's jaw worked. You don't, he started and started again lower. You don't know what it's like, Harry, standing next to it, standing next to you. I held the locket. I felt what comes off you now and you don't even feel it. That's the worst part, you don't know. I'd wake up in the war and you'd be sitting there in the dark and the whole tent would be heavy. Like there was a storm in it that hadn't decided where to go. And it's worse now. It's so much worse now and you can't see it because it's inside you. He finally lifted his eyes and they were wet and furious and frightened, the eyes of a man who had talked himself into a high place and could not find the way down. I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because I love you and you scare me to death and somebody has to be willing to say it. Ron, Hermione said quietly. No, he should hear it. He should hear it from me, not from Pike. Ron's voice cracked down the middle. I've got Rosie coming and I'm not going to raise a kid in a world where you decide one day you've had enough of all of us. I won't. Harry stood in the cold and listened to the man he had thought of as a brother explain why he was going to help kill him, and the thing he felt did not have a name. He was willing to give it, so he gave it nothing. He let his face stay still. He had a great deal of practice keeping his face still. Hermione, he said, tell me you talked them out of it. Tell me you're here to talk them out of it. The tears were still standing in her eyes. She did not let them fall. I'm here because if it's going to be done, she said, and her voice was steady, and that was the most terrible thing in the chamber. It has to be done by someone who loves you enough to do it right. I read everything, Harry, every account, every measurement Croker would let me see, and a great many he wouldn't. I sat with it for 4 months. I tried to find the argument that meant we were wrong, she breathed. I couldn't find it. You're going to outlive us. You're going to outlive our children and their children, and you're going to keep getting stronger, and there is no version of the next 200 years where the only thing standing between the wizarding world and a single all-powerful immortal is that man's good character. Not because you're bad, because nobody's character survives that. Power like that doesn't keep a person. It wears them down to the power. I've watched it start. I've watched you stop coming to dinner because you couldn't stand the way we looked at you, and I understood it, and it broke my heart, and it didn't change a single line of the arithmetic. She lifted her wand a fraction. I'm sorry, I love you. This is the kindest thing I will ever do, and you'll never know it, and I'm going to do it anyway. It was, Harry thought, the cruelest thing he had ever heard, and the worst of it was that it was an argument, a real one, the kind he could not simply hate. She had done the sums. He had done some of the same sums himself, alone in the dark, in the long quiet of the empty house. He had felt the thing growing in him that did not settle. He had wondered where the top of it was. He had wondered on the bad nights what he would be in 100 years and whether there would be enough of Harry left in it to matter. She had wondered the same thing, and she had decided to answer the question with the veil. You could have asked me, Harry said. We did the next best thing, Pike said gently. We decided it where you couldn't talk us out of it. You're very persuasive, Mr. Potter. We none of us trusted ourselves to look you in the eye and stay decided, so he nodded to Croker. We arranged not to have to. Harry understood the shape of it then, all at once, the whole machine, not the wands, not the dozen oars. They knew the wands would not be enough. They had known it before they sent the owl down his chimney. The wands were the second thing. The first thing was in the air, and he had been breathing it since he came down the stairs, and he had been too busy reading their faces to read the room. The chamber was a bottle. Croker had made it a bottle. There were runes cut fresh into the worn stone of the tears, a ring of them, faint silver and humming below hearing, and they were not there to attack him. They were there to make him small. A suppression lattice, old department work. The kind of thing they had once built to hold a captured dragon's fire or a poltergeist's spite, scaled up and tuned, Harry realized, tuned to him to the particular shape of the storm that Ron said came off him in the dark. The longer he stood inside the ring, the thinner his magic ran. He could feel it now that he was looking for it, the strange, muffled distance of the thing behind his sternum, the storm pressed flat under glass. He had walked into the bottle on his own feet because he had refused to believe his friends would build him one. That's clever, Harry said to Croker, because it was, and because there was no one else in the room worth saying it to. How long does it hold? Long enough, Croaker said. Long enough for what? Croaker looked at the veil. The tattered gray hung from its stone arch and swayed, and the cold pull behind Harry's sternum answered it, thin and patient, the draft from the room he could not see into. There's no body this way, Croaker said, almost apologetic, a craftsman explaining the elegance of a joint. No grave, nothing to dig up and weep over, nothing to make a martyr of, nothing to bring back. Whatever you've become, Mr. Potter, the veil is older than it, and the veil takes everything and it gives nothing back. It's the one door in the world that only opens one way. We thought, given what you are, it was the only thing we could be sure of. He had the grace to look, for one moment, almost sorry. It's quick, they've all said it's quick, we don't really know. You don't really know, Harry repeated. No, said Croaker, no one's ever come back to say. Harry looked at the veil. He looked at it the way he had looked at the cold hearth that morning a long time ago in another life that had ended when an owl came down his chimney. The gray cloth stirred. Behind it or through it or under it there were voices. There had been voices the last time at 15, voices he had strained to hear, and Luna had heard them too, and Hermione had pulled him back from the edge with both hands and said, "There's nothing there, Harry, there's nothing." She had said that. She had pulled him back from this exact edge with both hands 6 years ago, and now she stood with her wand up and the tears not falling and waited for him to go over it. "Do it now," Hermione said, "or I won't be able to." Robards moved first. He was a soldier, and he did the soldier's thing, which was to act before the feeling caught up, and the stunner that left his wand was no schoolboy's spell. It was the full red weight of the head of the Auror office thrown to drop a troll. It caught Harry in the chest, and the suppression ring drank the resistance out of him, and he felt the storm behind his sternum strain against the glass and failed to break it in time, and the spell took him off his feet. And then they all moved, because once one of them had done it the rest could bear too, and the chamber filled with red light. He got his wand up. He was fast, even drowning. He was faster than any of them, even with the bottle pressed flat over his magic, and his shield bloomed and held against the first 6 and the 7th. And then the suppression ring leaned its silent weight on the shield, and it guttered like the fire in his hearth with the chimney closed. He turned the 8th curse with a flick that should have flung it back through Robards' teeth and instead made it merely miss. He felt his own power answering him from a great muffled distance, a man shouting down a well. He put 2 Aurors on the floor before the count of 10, cleanly, no blood, the way he did everything now, and it was not nearly enough. He found Ron's face in the storm of light. Ron had not cast. Ron stood with his wand up and his arm shaking and his mouth open and no spell coming out of it. And his eyes were on Harry, and they were the eyes of the boy who had followed a 60-foot troll into a girl's bathroom because his friend was inside. For half a second in all that red light, it was just the two of them, and Harry thought he won't, and was glad of it in a way that had nothing to do with surviving. Then Hermione's spell took him in the back of the knee, a severing charm, precise, surgical, the kind you used when you needed a target down and not dead, and his leg went out from under him. And as he fell, he saw that Ron still had not cast, and that Ron was weeping openly now, and that it did not matter at all whether Ron cast, because Hermione had done the sums, and Hermione never needed anyone else to be brave. He went down on the worn stone 2 feet from the dais. The suppression ring was loudest here, right under the veil, a silent scream pressed against the inside of his skull. And the storm behind his sternum was a man at the bottom of a well now, and the red light kept coming, 3 more, 4, a steady patient rain of it from a dozen wands, holding him down, not killing him, only holding him, while Robards and another Auror got their hands under his arms and dragged him up the 2 steps onto the dais. He fought. He fought with everything the bottle would let him reach, which was the strength of an ordinary strong man and no more, and an ordinary strong man against 2 Aurors and a severing charm in his leg and a suppression lattice singing him to sleep was not enough, had never been going to be enough. That was the whole architecture of it. That was the cleverness Croaker had been so quietly proud of. They got him to the edge of the arch. The veil was a hand's breadth from his face. The voices were enormous now, a sea of them, and he could not make out a single word, and he knew, the way you know things in dreams, that one of the words was his mother's and that he would give the rest of whatever he was to hear it. "Harry," Hermione's voice behind him breaking at last. "Harry, I'm sorry, look away, you don't have to watch it." "You should watch it," Harry said. His own voice came out level. He was proud of that later, across all the years, that at the end of the only life in which he could die, his voice came out level. "You did the sums, you should watch the answer." He found Ron one more time. Ron had dropped his wand. It lay on the stone at his feet and he had not picked it up, and he was looking at Harry with his whole ruined face, and he said something, 2 words that the sea of voices drowned. Harry never knew what they were. He spent a long time afterward deciding what they had been. He never settled it. Robards and the other Auror swung him back and threw him forward into the veil. The gray cloth touched his face. It was not cloth. It was the place where cloth would be if the world bothered to put anything there. It was cold the way the space between stars is cold, a cold with no bottom, and it took him the way water takes a stone, without effort, without malice, without any acknowledgement at all that a thing of weight and will and 21 years of being Harry had passed through it. The last thing he saw of the world that left him for dead was the underside of the stone arch, and beyond it, very small, his 2 best friends standing in the blue Auror light with their faces turned up to watch the answer to the sum. Then the gray closed over him and the voices swallowed the chamber, and the suppression ring and the wands and the careful regret on the minister's face all went out together like the fire in a hearth with the chimney sealed, and there was nothing, and the nothing was complete, and Harry Potter fell out of the world entirely and did not come back, not for 3 days. But that is the next part, and they did not stay to see it. They sealed the chamber and went up in the rattling lift, the dozen aurors and the small gray man and the minister and the two who had loved him best, and somewhere around level 6 Hermione finally let the tears fall, and Ron picked his wand up off the floor of the death chamber and could not have said then or ever why he had not used it. The fountain in the atrium stayed stilled. They turned the lights back on as they left so that the cleaners would find nothing strange in the morning, and Eldon Pike went home to his narrow house and slept badly with the regret still buttoned to his chin, believing as a clever man believes the thing he has staked his life on that the one door in all the world that opened only one way had done what doors do. Behind them, in the dark 200 feet below the city, the veil swayed in its wind from nowhere. And something on the far side of it took hold of Harry Potter and would not let him go, and was not the thing that any of them had planned. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, What Death Returned. There was no floor. That was the first thing Harry understood, and he understood it the way you understand a thing in the half-second after a stair gives way before fear arrives, when the body is still telling itself the lie that the ground will be there. There was no floor, and there was no chamber, and there was no pain in his severed knee, and there was no knee. There was a gray that was not a color, going on in every direction that direction could go, and through it ran a current, slow and enormous and patient, and he was a leaf on the current, and the current went one way only, the way Croaker had promised, down towards something that had no name because nothing had ever come back to give it one. He should have been afraid. He took inventory of himself in the place that had no floor and found that he was not. He was tired in the bones he did not have, and underneath the tiredness there was a thing he recognized because he had carried it most of his life, a flat gray readiness, the willingness to look at the worst thing in the room and not flinch. He looked at the current carrying him down, he let it carry him. He had spent 2 years deciding he would rather walk into the worst the world could do than turn his face from it, and the world had finally taken him up on the offer, and there was a kind of bleak satisfaction in finding that he had meant it. Then the gray thinned the way fog thins, and on the far side of it there were lights, not stars. He thought star at first because the mind reaches for the nearest word, but stars are cold and these were warm, low, and gold and close, hundreds of them, thousands, a country of small steady fires laid out across a dark that had texture to it, that breathed. The current was carrying him along the edge of that country the way a river carries a man past a lit village on a winter night, near enough to see the windows, never near enough to knock. And the lights were not lights. As he came level with them, they resolved, the way a crowd resolves into faces, and they were faces, and he knew them. He knew all of them. There was his father at the front, James, looking exactly as he had in the forest 2 years ago, young and untidy and grinning, the grin Harry wore himself when he was too tired to keep his face still. There was Sirius beside him with one hand raised, not waving, just lifted, the gesture of a man about to say something and deciding against it. There was Remus, gray and gentle, and beside him a witch with hair that could not decide what color to be, and the two of them stood close in the way the living never quite manage. Fred was there, laughing at something, of course he was laughing. Dumbledore stood a little apart with his hands folded into his sleeves and his blue eyes very steady, and they were not twinkling, and that absence said more than any speech. And at the front of all of them, closest to the edge, closest to the slow gray river that was carrying her son past her, stood his mother. Lily did not reach for him. That was the thing that nearly broke whatever was left of Harry in that place. She held her hands at her sides and she looked at him with her whole green-eyed face, and she shook her head once slowly, the way you tell a child no across a crowded room when you cannot reach him with anything but your eyes. No, she said. He heard it without hearing it, the way he had heard the voices through the veil at 15, a word arriving in him already meaning itself. Not you, not yet, not like this. I didn't choose it, Harry said, or thought, or was. They chose it, I let them. The current pulled at him. The country of lights began very gently to slide past. I'm tired, I'd like to stay. I know. His mother walked along the edge as the river carried him, keeping pace, and the others moved with her, the whole gold country of the dead drifting along its own shore to stay level with him for as long as the shore lasted. I know you would, that's why you can't. She was crying and she was smiling, and these were not opposite things here. You don't get to be tired yet, Harry, you don't get to come in out of the cold. There's a thing you carry and you've never once put it down, and you can't bring it through this door and you won't leave it behind, so you can't come. Do you understand me? Whatever happens next, it isn't us turning you away, it's you, it was always going to be you. Then change it, Harry said. Whatever it is, I'll put it down, tell me how to put it down. You can't. That was serious, and his voice was the voice Harry remembered, rough and warm and certain. We tried, kid. All of us, the whole time you were on the way down, we argued your case. There isn't one, you can't put it down because it isn't a thing you're holding, it's a thing you are. You don't get to stop being it any more than the rest of us got to stop being dead. His raised hand opened at last, and it was not a wave and it was not a blessing. It was a man showing another man that his hands were empty, that there was nothing in them to give. I'm sorry, God, I'm sorry, of all of us it had to be you. It's all right, Harry, that was Remus, gentle, certain. Listen to me, it's all right to go back, it isn't a punishment, it only feels like one because you're tired. The tiredness passes, the rest of it you learn to carry. How long does the tiredness take to pass? Harry said. Remus did not answer. None of them answered, that was the answer. And then the river bent, and the country of lights was suddenly not beside him but above him, receding, and there was a sound in the gray under everything that he had been hearing since he entered and had taken for the current itself. It was not the current, it was attention. Something in this place had become aware of him, the way a vast still pond becomes aware of a stone, not at the surface but all the way down, a single slow ripple of notice spreading out from the bottom of everything. The gray gathered. It did not take a shape, it was older than shape, but it pressed in around him until the pressing was a kind of presence, until the dark had a center and the center was turned toward him, and Harry, who had faced a basilisk at 12 and a dark lord at 17 and a chamber full of the people he loved at 21, looked into the thing that all of those had only been rumors of and did not look away. "You are not for me," the presence said. It did not say it in words. It said it in the way the temperature of a room says a window has opened. There was no malice in it and no mercy in it. It was the most honest thing he had ever encountered, and the honesty was terrible. "You were sent down the one road that has no turning, and you have come all the way to the bottom of it, and now there is a difficulty." A difficulty, Harry repeated. He found he could speak to it. He suspected very few had. "Three things were made long ago by hands that wanted what you wanted just now. Come in out of the cold, to stop being tired. Three things to master the one thing that masters everything. A wand that does not lose, a stone that calls the gone, a cloak that hides even from me." The attention turned slow and total, like the turning of something on the floor of an ocean. Foolish things, children's things. No one ever held all three and understood them. They held them and wanted to live forever and died like everyone, because wanting to never end is not the same as mastering the end. You did not want any of them. You took the wand to keep it from a worse hand and gave it back. You let the stone fall in a wood and never went to find it. You wore the cloak to hide from your schoolmasters and thought nothing of it. You united the three and mastered the end the only way the end can be mastered, which is to walk toward it without flinching and without wanting it for the sake of someone else, and to put the things down afterward and not pick them up again. The gray pressed closer. There was for the first time something in the presence that was not honesty. It was very near to regret. "You are my master," Death said, "and I cannot take my master, and I cannot send my master back unchanged, because the road has no turning and you have walked all of it, and a thing that walks all of my road and does not stay does not come away the way it came. You will go back, you cannot stay. This is not a gift. Remember that I told you it was not a gift." "Tell me what I'll be," Harry said. "If you're sending me back, you owe me the words for it." "I owe you nothing," Death said, "and I will give you the words anyway, because you are the first master I have had who asked for the truth instead of more years." The dark drew its long breath. "You will not age, you will not sicken. No blade will keep its edge in you, and no curse will keep its shape. They will come for you with fire and with stone and with old, patient magics, and every one of them will reach for the part of you that can end, and find that I have already reached for it, and that it answered to me and I gave it back, and so there is nothing left in you for them to take. Worse for them, I am thorough. Each time they try, a little more of what could die in you dies here with me, and a little more of the force that cannot dies into the world through the place where you stand. They will not weaken you by trying to kill you, they will refine you. Every attempt on your life is a hammer blow on a blade that is already finished, and all it does is ring." "And the cost," Harry said, because his mother had told him there was one, and his mother had never lied to him in the whole short time he had known her. "She said there was a thing I carry. She said I couldn't bring it through. What's the cost?" "You already know it," Death said, "or you would not have asked in that voice." And the presence was already withdrawing, the dark loosening its center. The gold country of lights gone now to single point far above him like the last star before dawn. It is the cold with no door left in it. You will walk in the world for as long as the world lasts, and the cold will walk in you, and when you are tired past the end of all tiredness you will come looking for this door, and it will not be here because you closed it yourself the moment you refused to want it. Go home, master. They will keep trying to send you to me. Tell them when they ask that the answer will always be the same. The point of gold went out and the river reversed. It did not reverse the way water reverses. It reversed the way grief does, all at once and from the inside. The whole enormous patient current that went one way, only turning over in its bed and becoming a thing that flung him upward, back along the road that had no turning. And he understood as he went that the road did have a turning now, that he was the turning, that he was a wound the road had taken and would carry forever, the one stone the river had ever had to spit back up its own throat. The gray screamed past him. The cold went into him and did not come out the other side. It found the marrow and stayed, a tenant that would never leave, and he felt himself thinning as he rose, felt the part of him that could be tired and the part of him that could be afraid and the part of him that could simply eventually stop, all of it stretching like a thread drawn out too long, getting brighter and finer and less able to break. He was being made into something. He could feel the shape of it, and he had no word for the shape, and he would spend the rest of forever failing to find one. The last thing before the gray gave way to gray of a different and lesser kind was his mother's voice, already distant, already on the wrong side of a door that had just closed for good. "Carry it well," she said. "I'm sorry, carry it well." Then the cloth touched his face from the inside, and Harry Potter fell back into the world through the only door in it that opened one way, and proved in the falling that it now opened two. He came through the veil at 2:15 in the morning, 3 days after they had thrown him into it, and he landed on the worn stone of the dais on his hands and knees, and he was breathing. For a long moment that was all there was, the breathing. The stone under his palms, cold and gritty and real, the most real thing in any world. The death chamber was dark, the blue candles of the round room above throwing their dim light down the long stairwell, and the silence had the particular weight of a place that has been sealed and forgotten, dust settling, no living thing meant to be there. His knee did not hurt, he looked down at it. The robe was cut through where Hermione's severing charm had taken him, the cloth stiff with 3 days of dried blood, and under the cut there was skin, unbroken, unscarred, as though the wound had never been permitted to have happened. He got to his feet. The suppression ring was still humming. He could see it now, the silver runes cut fresh into the stone tiers, the lattice they had tuned to the shape of him, and it was still going, still pouring its silent weight into the chamber, still trying to press the storm behind his sternum flat under glass. Croker had left it running, of course he had. A craftsman does not switch off the kiln until he is sure the thing inside is finished. Harry stood inside the ring that had been built to make him small, and he reached, the way he had reached for the dead coals in his hearth a lifetime ago, and there was nothing to muffle. That was the thing he understood, standing on the dais in the dark. The storm was not behind glass anymore. The storm was not behind anything. The suppression lattice leaned its whole weight against him and found nothing to lean on, because the thing it had been built to contain was no longer a thing that could be contained. It had no edges for the lattice to grip. It was not stored in him the way magic is stored in a wizard, a reservoir behind a wall. It ran through him the way current runs through the air in the half-second before lightning, the way cold ran through the country of the dead, a force passing through a place that happened for now to be shaped like a man. He looked at the runes. He did not raise the wand. The wand was somewhere on the floor of the chamber where it had fallen 3 days ago, and he found he did not especially need it. He looked at the ring of silver light that had helped them murder him, and he asked it, without words, in the new grammar he had brought back up the road, to stop. The runes did not crack or shatter or flare. They simply forgot how to be runes. The silver light went out of them the way understanding goes out of a man's eyes, and the humming under hearing stopped, and the chamber was only a chamber again, old stone and dead air, and the most powerful confinement the Department of Mysteries had built in 300 years was a circle of meaningless scratches on the floor. Somewhere above, on the stairs, a light moved. "Who's there?" Harry knew the kind of voice. It was one of the unspeakables, a younger one, the sort they put on the night watches because the night watches were tedious and nothing ever happened on them. The footsteps came down the stone steps, quick and uncertain, and a wan light bobbed down the stairwell ahead of its owner. And then the unspeakable came around the curve of the wall and into the chamber and saw on the dais in front of the veil that took everything and gave nothing back, a dead man standing up. The unspeakable did the correct thing. Harry would give them that later. They did not freeze and they did not run. They raised their wand and they shouted the incantation for the alarm ward, and at the same time, in the same breath, because they were trained and afraid, they threw a stunner straight into the center of Harry's chest. The red light reached him and did not stop and did not land. It went into him the way light goes into deep water, and it did not come out the other side, and it did not knock him down, and it did not do anything at all except cease, swallowed, a small warmth absorbed by something vast and cold that had a great deal of room. Harry felt it arrive and felt it stop being. He looked down at his own chest, at the place where a stunner from 6 feet should have folded any living man in half, and then he looked up at the unspeakable, who had gone the color of the dust on the floor. "That won't work," Harry said. He was not unkind about it. He found distantly that he did not have it in him to be unkind to a frightened person doing their job. "Nothing like that is going to work. You should put your wand down before you hurt yourself trying." The alarm ward had not triggered. He noticed that without surprise. The unspeakable had shouted the incantation correctly, and the ward had simply not heard it, the way the lattice had not heard the order to confine him, the way the world, he was beginning to understand, had developed a small blind spot in the exact shape of Harry Potter, a place where the ordinary rules came to be enforced, and found that the law no longer ran there. The unspeakable turned and fled up the stairs, and Harry let them go. He had no quarrel with the night watch. He had got as far as the foot of the stairs himself when the second light came down, slower than the first, steady, a man who did not hurry because hurrying was for people who could be surprised. Croker stepped into the chamber and stopped at the edge of it and looked at the dais, and at the dead-eyed runes, and at Harry standing in the wreck of 3 centuries of his department's confidence, and the small gray man's face did a thing that very few people had ever seen it do. It went still in a way that was not calm. "Mr. Potter," Croker said, "you left the ring running," Harry said. "I appreciate the thoroughness. It made it very clear when it stopped working exactly how thorough you'd been." Croker did not raise his wand. He was cleverer than the night watch. He had seen the runes, and a man who has spent his life measuring things knows the look of an instrument that has failed not because it broke, but because the thing it measured changed past the top of its scale. He took instead a small brass device from inside his robes, a thing of dials and a slender needle, and he held it up between them, and the needle, which was meant to find the edge of a man's power and report it, swung hard to the pin and stayed there, quivering, pinned the way a compass pins when you lay it on the lodestone itself. "That's not possible," Croker said. He said it quietly, almost to the device. "There's a ceiling. There's always a ceiling. The Dark Lord had a ceiling. Dumbledore had a ceiling. Magic is a finite resource in a finite vessel. That is the first principle. That is the floor under everything we do down here." The needle did not move off the pin. "There's no reading. You don't have a ceiling. You have a—" He stopped. He looked up from the device to Harry's face, and whatever he saw there finished the sentence for him in a way the language could not. "You measured Voldemort," Harry said, "and you found his top easily. Pike told me that in his little speech before they threw me in. I've been thinking about it. He meant it to frighten me. It should have frightened you more. You had a man whose top you couldn't find, and instead of trying to understand what that meant, you decided the safest thing was to put him through the one door that doesn't open." He took a step toward the stairs, and Croker, to his credit, did not back away, though everything in his body wanted to. "You're a careful man. You're the most careful man in this building, so I'm going to ask you a careful man's question, and I want you to take it home tonight and sit with it. What did you think was on the other side of that door, Croaker? You sent things through it for 300 years and you never knew, you said so yourself. No one's ever come back to say. And the first time in 300 years that someone does come back, your first thought is that it isn't possible. Harry, let that stand. It's all possible. That's the thing your department was supposed to be brave enough to know. It's all possible, and you spent 3 days making certain of me, and you made certain of exactly the wrong thing. He left Croaker standing in the chamber with the pinned needle in his hand, and he went up the stairs into the lesser dark of the round room, and behind him the veil swayed in its wind from nowhere, and the most careful man in the ministry stood and looked at it for a very long time and did not in the end take a single measurement, because he had finally understood that there are questions a careful man is better off not knowing the answer to, and that he had just been handed one of them walking. The Ministry of Magic at 2:30 in the morning was a different country than the one that had murdered him at 8. It was nearly empty. A skeleton of night clerks and a thin scatter of aurors on the duty rotation, lamps turned low, the great atrium lying dark and cavernous around its stilled fountain. Harry walked up out of the Department of Mysteries and into that emptiness, and the building did not know what to do with him, and he watched it not know. The first patrol found him on the lift. 2 aurors, both young, both jumpy, summoned by an alarm that had finally fired 3/4 away from where it should have and that nobody could trace. They saw a man in a blood-stiff coat step out of the lift into the half-lit atrium, and they did the thing aurors are trained to do with men in blood-stiff coats at 2:30 in the morning, which was to challenge him, and then, when he did not stop walking, to drop him. It is worth saying plainly what they tried, because they tried everything. A full-strength stunner, the kind that breaks ribs, a body bind that should have locked every joint in his body to iron, a severing charm aimed low, the way you aim it when you have decided the man in front of you is too dangerous to take whole. The spells crossed the dark atrium in their separate colors, red and blue and white, well cast, well aimed, the work of people who were good at their jobs, and they reached the place where Harry was walking, and they went out, all 3 swallowed, the colors folding into him and not coming back, and Harry did not break stride. He stopped then because they had stopped casting and they were staring at him, and one of them had begun to back away with their wand still raised and their mouth working without sound. "I'm not going to hurt you," Harry said. "I want you to remember that I said that. You're going to tell people what you saw tonight, and when you do, I want you to be able to say honestly that I told you I wasn't going to hurt you and then didn't." He looked from one of them to the other. They were so young. Everyone in this building had always been so young, even the old ones. That was the thing he was only now beginning to see from the outside. "Go and wake your head of office. Tell Robards that the thing he threw away 3 nights ago has come back, and that it isn't angry yet, and that he should think very carefully about how he'd like to spend the time before it is." He walked between them and they let him because there was nothing else in the world for them to do, and he crossed the dark atrium past the stilled fountain and the great seal of the ministry set into the floor, and behind him one of the aurors finally got a sound out, a single cracked syllable that might have been a name and might have been a prayer. He did not take the flue. He did not trust the flue, and more than that, he wanted the air. He went up through the visitor's entrance, up the long-dead phone box that the ministry kept for show, and he came out into a London street at 3 in the morning, wet pavement shining under the sodium lamps, the city breathing its enormous, indifferent breath all around him, taxis and night buses and a fox trotting along the gutter with something in its mouth, and Harry Potter stood on the pavement, alive, immortal, 3 days dead, and tried to feel the cold. He could not. That was the moment it landed. Not the spells that would not touch him, not the runes that forgot themselves, not the river that had spat him back. It was the rain. It had started again while he was underground, a fine cold London rain coming down through the lamplight, and it fell on his upturned face and ran down his collar, and he felt the wet of it, and he felt the weight of it, and he could not feel the cold of it because the cold was already inside him, a tenant in the marrow, and it had set the bar so far down that ordinary cold could not reach the level. He stood in the rain and waited to shiver the way a living body shivers, the small animal complaint of being out in the weather, and his body had forgotten how. He waited a long time. The rain kept coming. He did not shiver. He never would again. He found standing there that he was reaching for the stone. It was reflex, the deepest one. Somewhere in a wood in the West Country there was a black stone turned 3 times in a dead boy's hand, lost in 2 years of leaf fall, and he had sworn he would never go and find it, and now he reached for it across all those miles the way the newly bereaved reach across the bed in the dark, knowing already before the hand closes on the cold sheet that there is no one there. He reached for the country of gold lights. He reached for the door. He reached for his mother's face and his father's grin and the lifted hand of his godfather, and he found, where the door had been, a wall, and the wall was new and the wall was him. You can't bring it through this door and you won't leave it behind. So you can't come. He understood it now. It had been the only true and complete thing his mother had said to him in the place with no floor, and he had understood it and not understood it. And now, standing in the rain that could not reach him, he understood it all the way to the bottom. The dead were not gone from him. That would have been a clean grief, a grief with edges, a grief a man could eventually set down. They were not gone. They were exactly where they had always been, one door away, and the door had been the one thing in the universe that everyone got to walk through in the end. The one mercy that was never denied to anyone, beggar or king, coward or saint, and it had been taken from him. He would walk the earth until the earth was cold, and at the end of all of it the door would still be shut, and his mother would still be standing one room away, and he would never reach her because the price of not being able to die was not being able to arrive. He stood in the rain and let the one thing he would allow himself move through him, and it was not rage and it was not fear. It was grief, the oldest and the plainest, and he let it come and he let it pass, and when it had passed he was still standing because that was the new arithmetic, the only arithmetic left. Whatever came he would still be standing forever, world without end. He wiped the rain off his face with the back of his hand. The cold sat in his marrow and watched him do it. "All right," Harry said, to the empty street, to the fox, to the indifferent breathing city, to the door that would never open. All right. He did not go to Grimmauld Place. They would watch Grimmauld Place. He had learned in the war how to be a man with no fixed address, and the skill came back to his hands like a language you were raised in, and he spent what was left of the night moving, and somewhere in the moving he found a newspaper. It was the early edition of the Prophet, the Friday paper, blown flat against the railings of a square in the rain, and Harry peeled it off the iron and held it under a street lamp and read about his own death. They had done it well, he would give them that. There was a photograph of him on the front page, an old one from just after the war when he had still occasionally smiled for cameras, and above it the headline ran in the heavy black type, "The Prophet kept for kings and catastrophes, Harry Potter dead AT-21. The story underneath was a small masterpiece of grief and vagueness. A sudden illness, it said. A magical malady, rare and swift, a late consequence of the unprecedented forces he had channeled to end the war, something his great heart and greater power had not in the end been able to withstand. The healers had done everything. The minister had been at his side. There would be a state funeral on Sunday at the ministry's expense, the body to lie in honor in the atrium where the people might pay their respects, and then to be interred privately, the family had asked, in a place that would not be named, so that the savior of the wizarding world might at last have the peace in death that the world's love had denied him in life. No body this way, no grave to dig up, nothing to bring back. They had even built him a coffin to put in the atrium. There was a sidebar about it, the craftsmanship of it, white wood and silver fittings, and Harry stood under the street lamp in the rain, and understood that on Sunday the wizarding world would file past a closed white box and weep over a man who was, at that moment, 2 miles away, reading about it in a stolen newspaper, unable to feel the cold. He read the names lower down, where the names always were. Minister Pike, devastated, had spoken of a personal friendship and a national loss. Gawain Robards, who had worked closely with Mr. Potter on matters of security, had been named Senior Undersecretary for Magical Defense in a reshuffle announced, with what the paper called unfortunate timing and Harry called something else, the very same morning. And at the bottom in 2 lines, because the dead get the headline and the living get the footnotes, the family had no comment. Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Weasley were said to be too grieved to speak. Ms. Hermione Granger, recently appointed to a senior post in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, had asked for privacy. Harry read the 2 lines twice. Then he folded the paper neatly along its original creases and tucked it inside his coat, because a man should keep the record of his own funeral, and he stood for a while in the rain and did the thing he had been so good at all his life, which was to be ready for the worst without letting it touch his face, except that there was no worst left to be ready for, because the worst had already happened 3 nights ago on a dais under the city, and he had come back from it, and that was the whole problem. The rain eased toward dawn. The sky over the rooftops went from black to the color of dirty pearl. He had one place left in the world he wanted to put his eyes on before he began, and he had told himself for the length of the night that he would not, and as the light came up he found his feet had decided otherwise. The cottage was outside a village the war had never reached, an hour west, and he did not apparate to the door because the door would be watched now by people who would be watching it precisely in case a dead man came to it. He came down instead through the wet fields in the gray before sunrise and stopped at the top of the rise in the dripping hedge where a man could see the cottage and the cottage could not see him, and he looked down at the one warm window in it. There was a light on in the kitchen. Andromeda was up early, the way the grieving and the very old are always up early, and through the small bright square of the window Harry could see her moving, filling a kettle, and he could see in the high chair at the table a small dark head that turned toward the door every time it heard a sound in the lane, because a 4-year-old does not understand the word funeral, and had been told that his godfather was gone and did not believe it. The way the very young correctly do not believe in the permanence of anything, and kept turning toward the door. Harry stood in the hedge in the dawn and watched his godson turn toward a door that he, of all people in the world, could not walk through. He could have. That was the cruelty inside the cruelty. The door of the cottage opened both ways. It was the only door in his life left that did. He could have gone down the hill and across the wet garden and lifted the latch and picked Teddy up out of the high chair, and the boy would have shrieked with the particular joy of being right when the adults were wrong. He could have done it. And then Andromeda would know he was alive, and the watchers in the lane would know within the hour, and they would come here to this cottage, to this kitchen, with their fire and their stone and their old patient magics, because they had already proven they would use the people he loved as the lever to move him. And the safest place in the world for Teddy Lupin was a world that believed Harry Potter was dead and had no reason on earth to come to this rise to look for him. So he did the only loving thing the new arithmetic permitted. He stayed in the hedge. He watched the boy turn toward the door and turn away and turn toward it again. He watched the kettle boil and Andromeda lift it off and pour, and he watched her stop halfway through the pouring and stand very still, the way a woman stands when she feels something she cannot name pass over the back of her garden, and she turned and looked out of the bright window into the gray, straight up the rise, straight at the hedge where he stood, and for a moment Harry was certain she saw him. She did not. The window was a mirror from the inside in that light, and she was looking at her own reflection in the dark beyond it, and after a moment she turned back to the table and said something to the boy that made him laugh, and the sound of the laugh came up the hill thin and clear in the wet morning, the single most human thing Harry had heard since the cloth had touched his face from the inside. He let himself have it. He stood in the hedge and let himself have the sound of his godson laughing in a warm kitchen, and he understood, having it, exactly what it was going to cost him to keep them safe, which was that he would have to do all of it from out here in the hedge in the cold he could not feel for the rest of a life that did not end. He would watch this boy grow from the top of this rise and from 1,000 other rises like it. He would watch him learn to walk and then to fly and then to leave, and he would watch the people who had laughed in warm kitchens go gray and slow and at last walk through the one door one after another, all of them, everyone, while he stood in the hedge and did not age and did not arrive. That was the whole of it. That was the sum complete with nothing left to carry. The sun came up over the far hedge and put a hard gold line along the wet grass, and the cottage window lost its lamplit warmth in the ordinary light of day, and Harry Potter turned from the rise and walked back up into the fields, and he was not angry, not yet, and that was the thing the two Aurors would never be able to make Robards believe. The worst part was not the fury. The worst part was the patience. He had time now, all the time there had ever been or would ever be, and the people who had done this to him had exactly as much time as their ordinary mortal lives allowed, and that was the only sum left that interested him, and he had already, without meaning to, begun to work it. He turned up his useless collar against the rain he could not feel, and went to find somewhere quiet to begin. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The unkillable thing. The Forest of Dean did not remember him, which was a mercy because Harry remembered it for both of them. He went there on the fourth day because it was the one place in the country where he had once been hunted and had survived, and because a man learning what he has become needs ground he can trust, and the only ground Harry trusted anymore was ground that had already tried to kill him once and failed. He came in on foot through the wet bracken under the bare oaks, and he found, without trying very hard, the clearing where a tent had stood through the worst winter of his life, where he had nearly frozen and nearly starved and nearly lost the only two people in the world who would, 2 years later, throw him through a door. The frost was on the dead leaves, his breath did not show in the cold, he noticed that. He was keeping a list now of the things he no longer did. He sat on a fallen trunk in the clearing and began methodically, the way he did everything, to take an inventory of the new arithmetic. The wand stayed in his sleeve. He had spent the night testing whether he needed it, and the answer was that he did not, in the way a fluent man does not need to translate, and that the wand had become a courtesy he paid to a memory of himself. When he wanted a thing now, the wanting was the spell. He looked at a stone the size of his fist on the forest floor and wanted it off the ground, and it came up smooth and unhurried and hung in the air at the height of his eye, turning, and he had not said a word or moved a finger, and the effort it cost him was the effort of deciding no more, the small frictionless cost of preferring one thing to another. He looked at the stone and wanted it hot, and it went from gray to red to white in the space of a breath, dripping, and the heat that should have seared his face arrived and found nothing in him that minded heat and passed. He let the molten thing fall and it went into the wet leaves with a hiss and a curl of steam, and the forest, which had been full of small night sounds, had gone silent all around him, the way a wood goes silent when a large predator walks through it. He tried other things through the night, the way a man tries the rooms of a house he has just inherited and is not sure he wants. He stood in the middle of the clearing and wanted the rain that had begun to fall somewhere else, and it did, a clean dry circle opening around him 40 feet across, the drops swerving aside at the edge of it without any wind to move them, so that he stood in a column of still dry air in the middle of a wet wood, and the world simply agreed to leave him out of the weather. He had not built a charm to do it. There was no charm that did it. He had read enough to know that whether working at that scale was a thing whole covens died attempting. He had only preferred it, and the world had complied, and that was the part that should have frightened him and didn't, because nothing frightened him now, and the absence of the fear was itself the most frightening thing in the clearing, if there had been anyone left in him to be frightened by it. This was the part the Department of Mysteries would have wanted to measure, and the part Harry found least interesting because power had never been the question. He had always had more of it than was good for him. That was the whole reason he was sitting on a dead tree in a frozen wood instead of asleep in a bed. The interesting question was the other one, the one his mother had handed him, the one about cost, and he spent the gray hours before dawn finding the edges of it. He did not get hungry. He sat in the clearing through a day and into a second night, and the hunger did not come, the ordinary animal clock of it simply absent, and when he made himself eat a strip of the cold meat he still carried, out of an old discipline, it sat in him like a coin in a drawer, a thing he had put away and would not need. He did not get tired in the body. The mind tired in the way a mind tires of a long road, but the body that should have ached from 2 nights on a frozen log did not ache, did not stiffen, did not so much as register the cold that was killing the last of the autumn leaves around him. He cut his own hand once with his own wand, deliberately drawing the point across the meat of his palm hard enough that it should have opened to the bone, and he watched the skin part and the dark blood well, and he watched it close. It did not heal slowly the way a wound heals, it unhappened. The blood drew back into a line and the line drew back into smoothness, and within 3 seconds his palm was a palm that had never been cut, and the small pain of it, which he had felt arrive, went out like the stunner had gone out, swallowed by something vast and cold that had a great deal of room and very little use for pain. The wood smelled of nothing. He noticed it on the second night, sitting on the dead log, that the wet earth and the rot and the cold green smell of a winter forest had thinned to a rumor, the way a color thins when the light goes, present but drained of the thing that made it matter. He could name the smells. He could not be reached by them. It was the same with taste. With the cold meat he made himself chew, with the sound of the river 2 fields off, all of it arriving correctly and landing nowhere, a world reported to him through glass by a clerk who got every detail right and none of the weight. And there was the other thing, the one he turned over longest in the dark. He did not sleep. He had lain down out of habit the first night and found that sleep would not come, not because his mind was loud, but because the door to it had been bricked up with all the others, and a man who cannot sleep cannot dream, and a man who cannot dream has lost the one place where the dead are allowed to visit the living without anyone's permission. Even that had been taken. He would not so much as meet his mother in a dream. He sat on the log in the bricked-up dark of a body that no longer rested, and added it to the list, and the list was getting long. He sat with that for a while. It was, he decided, the cruelest of the gifts that were not gifts, and the most quietly dangerous, because pain is the thing that keeps a man honest about the world. Pain is the body's argument against doing the stupid thing twice. A man who can put his hand in the fire and feel only the report of it, that is fire, without the conviction of it, do not do that again, is a man who will in time forget why the rest of them step around the fire. He understood, sitting on the dead log in the silent wood, the exact shape of what Hermione had been afraid of, and he understood that she had been right about the shape and wrong about everything else, which is the most dangerous kind of right there is. The power would not corrupt him. Power had never been the danger. The danger was the slow subtraction of all the small, honest pains and hungers and colds that had told him, every day of his mortal life, that he was a creature among creatures, no more durable than the rest, owed nothing the rest were not owed. Take those away one by one, and what was left would still call itself Harry and would mean it, and would be wrong by a little more each year, until 1 century it stood over the small, warm, breakable lives of everyone it had ever loved and could not for the life of it remember why their breaking should matter when nothing broke him. He looked at his healed palm in the gray light. Not that, he said to the silent wood, to the cold in his marrow that was listening. Whatever else, not that. It was not a vow he had any way to keep. He made it anyway. A man who can no longer feel the cold has to find some other way to remember which direction is warm. That was when the wards he hadn't known he was wearing told him he was no longer alone. There were 9 of them, and they were good. He gave them that afterward, the way he had given Croaker the cleverness of the bottle. They came into the forest of Dean the way you come for something you have already decided is too dangerous to take alive, which is to say they did not come to talk. They came in under disillusionment, spread in a wide net through the trees, moving on the slow, careful schedule of people who have rehearsed, and at the center of the net, drawn on a sledge by 2 of them, was a thing Harry had not seen before and recognized at once for what it was: the bottle made portable. A squat iron frame the height of a man, hung with the same silver runework that had ringed the death chamber, humming below hearing. A suppression lattice they had pried off the walls of the ministry and bolted to a cart and dragged into a wood to drop over him like a net over a bird. Robards had moved fast. The 2 aurors had carried their cracked syllable of a message up to the new senior undersecretary for magical defense, and the new senior undersecretary, who had thrown Harry through the veil with his own hands, had understood in about 4 seconds what it would mean for a returned and unkillable Harry Potter to be seen by anyone who could not be silenced, and he had spent 3 days and the better part of his department's resources arranging to make certain that no one ever would. They had swept his old haunts, Grimmauld, the Burrows Lane, the coast at Shell Cottage, and the Forest of Dean, because someone in the planning room had been thorough, and Harry, who had chosen the one place he trusted, had chosen the one place they had thought to watch. He stood up off the dead log before the nearest of them was within 40 feet, and he let his voice carry into the trees, level and unhurried. "You can stop where you are," he said. "I know how many of you there are, and I know what you've brought. I'm going to give you one chance to turn around and drag that thing back to whatever room you took it from, and I'm going to give it to you because the last people who tried this were children and they didn't know any better, and you're not children and you do. So this is the only warning, go home." The net stopped. 9 people frozen in the bracken under their fading disillusionment, and Harry could feel the decision moving through them, the held breath of trained people who have just learned that the thing they came to ambush has been listening to them walk for 10 minutes. For a moment he thought they might take it. Aura training is built around the live assessment of force, and any one of them, looking at the man in the clearing who had named their numbers and their cargo without turning his head, should have updated. The one in command did not update. That was the trouble with the new regime. It had promoted for nerve over judgment, and nerve in the face of the truly unprecedented is only a faster way to the wrong decision. The command came down sharp and certain through the trees now, and the net closed, and they did the thing they had rehearsed, which was to drive the iron frame forward on its sledge and drop the suppression field over the clearing while 9 wands opened up at once. Harry let them. That was the thing the survivors could never properly explain afterward in the rooms where Robards made them explain it. He let them. He did not shield and he did not move. He stood in the center of the clearing while the portable bottle slammed its humming weight down over him, and 9 of the best trained wands in Britain poured everything they had been issued into the space he occupied. And the wood lit up white and red and sick poison green because someone had decided this was a target you used the unforgivables on, and the killing curses crossed the clearing in their flat green light and reached him and went out. All of it went out. The suppression field came down over him and found nothing to suppress, the way the ring in the chamber had found nothing, because there was no reservoir in him to press flat, only the force passing through, and the lattice's silver runes flared once, trying to grip a thing with no edges, and then began one by one to forget how to be runes. The curses arrived and were swallowed. And here was the part death had promised him in the place with no floor, the part he had not believed until he stood in it. Each spell that reached for the part of him that could end and found that part already gone did not simply fail. It fed him, he felt it. Every killing curse that broke against him broke a little more of what remained breakable, sent a little more of the cold up out of his marrow and into the wood, and with each one the silence around him deepened and the air took on the quality it took on in the deepest part of the night between the dead, and Harry Potter became, in the space of 9 wand beats, measurably more than he had been when they started. The iron frame came apart. Not violently, he did not throw it. He simply withdrew from it the agreement by which iron stays iron, and it sagged and ran and pooled, the runework guttering, the sledge beneath it catching and curling to ash, and the 2 oarers who had dragged it scrambled back from the spreading wrongness of metal that had forgotten how to be hard. The clearing had gone dark again because the curses had stopped. The 9 of them stood in the ringing silence with their wands still up and nothing left to do with them, and Harry stood in the center of the dead frame's slag and looked at them and let them look at him and did not raise a hand. "Now you know," he said. "Go and tell him," one of them broke. It was the youngest on the left flank, and the breaking was not cowardice. It was the simple human limit of standing 6 feet from a thing that should be dead and is not and will not be, and his wand hand jerked and a last killing curse left him, badly aimed, wide, and it struck not Harry but the great oak behind him, and the oak, 200 years old, did not splinter or burn. It died. The green light touched it and ran up into the canopy, and every leaf and twig and root of it gave up at once, the whole vast living architecture of the tree going gray and brittle and silent in a single breath, and it stood there dead and perfect for a moment and then came down, slow and enormous, across the clearing, and the 9 of them scattered from under it, and the ground shook when it fell. Harry looked at the dead tree. He had not done that. The young Auror had done that with a curse meant for him, and that was the lesson, that was the thing he would carry away from the Forest of Dean and that the wizarding world would spend years learning, that the danger of Harry Potter was not what he did. He had stood still and lifted not one finger. The danger was what the world did to itself, trying to end him. They had brought killing curses into a wood, and the wood had a dead oak in it now, and Harry's hands were clean, and that was somehow worse than if they had not been. "That's why you go home," Harry said into the silence, and his voice was not unkind, and that was the most frightening thing about it. "Not because of what I'll do to you, because of what you'll do swinging at something you can't hit. You'll bring down everything around me trying to bring me down, and you'll never touch me, and one day you'll look at what's left and understand that I didn't kill any of it. You did. Tell Robards I said so. Tell him the next ones he sends will do the same, and the ones after that, and that every time he tries he makes me harder to try at and softer in exactly the place he's afraid of." He let that sink. He threw away the part of me that could be killed. He should think about what he left. They gathered their broken command and their one weeping boy, and they went back through the trees the way they had come, leaving the slag of the bottle and the corpse of the oak, and Harry stood alone in the clearing where he had once nearly frozen to death, and was colder now than that winter had ever made him, and could not feel it. He stayed in the clearing a long while after they had gone, looking at the dead oak, because someone should look at it, and there was no one else, and he had learned a long time ago that the dead are owed at least a witness. In a windowless room on the first sublevel of the ministry, the morning after the Forest of Dean, 4 people sat around a long table and did not look at one another, and the silence in the room was the particular silence of people who have done a terrible thing together and are beginning to understand that it has not worked. Gawain Robards gave the report standing because he could not make himself sit. He had the survivors' accounts in front of him and he did not need them. He had made each of the 9 tell it to his face separately, and the accounts agreed in every particular, which was the thing that had taken the color out of him. 9 trained aurors, a full suppression rig, 3 killing curses confirmed cast at point blank into the target, and the target had stood in the middle of all of it with his hands at his sides and asked them to go home. "He didn't fight," Robards said. "That's what none of them can get past. He didn't fight us. He stood there and let us do our worst, and our worst was nothing, and then he told us to leave and we left. The rig's gone, not broken, gone. The iron ran like candle wax, and there's a dead oak in the Forest of Dean the size of a church that he didn't touch, that one of my own people killed swinging at him." He set his knuckles on the table. "You don't fight a thing like that, Minister." I've been fighting dark wizards for 30 years and I'm telling you there's nothing to fight. You can't lose to him because he won't engage, and you can't win because nothing you throw lands. He just gets bigger every time you try. Eldon Pike sat very straight at the head of the table with his hands folded, and the careful regret he wore in public had no place to live in a windowless room, and what was under it was not a thing he had a coat for. Then we stop trying, he said. We contain it quietly. Keep the lid on, the public doesn't have it, the prophet doesn't have it, and as long as that holds we have time to find it, the lid won't hold. That was Croker, small and gray in the corner, turning his pinned brass needle over and over in his fingers. I want to be precise because precision is the only thing I have left to offer this room. I measured him in the chamber when he came back. The instrument has a scale, the scale has a top, he is above the top of it. That is not a figure of speech. He is the first thing in 300 years of records that my department cannot assign a number to, and the reason I cannot assign him a number is that he is no longer the kind of thing that has won. The needle turned. You asked me to be sure of him, Minister, and I built you the surest thing I have ever built, and I wanted on the record that it was sufficient. It would have held the Dark Lord. It held nothing here because there was nothing here to hold. We did not fail to contain a powerful wizard. We removed the last limit from one. Every spell those 9 cast in that wood made him stronger. I have the readings. The line on them goes up. It does not come back down. The fourth person at the table had not spoken. Hermione Granger sat at the far end with her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea she had not drunk, and there were schematics spread in front of her, dozens of them, covered in her small, relentless hand, and she had been awake for so long that her eyes had the bruised glaze of someone whose body had given up asking. She had stopped going home. The flat she shared with Ron had a nursery half-painted in it, and she could not be in the same rooms as the half-painted nursery, because the whole reason she had done the thing on the dais was the child coming into those rooms, and the thing she had done to protect that child had risen out of the one door that did not open and was, by every account on the table, walking the country making itself stronger, and she could not sit in a half-painted nursery with that in the world. He's not going to attack the ministry, Hermione said. Her voice was flat and exhausted and certain. Everyone in this room is bracing for an attack and it isn't coming, and the fact that you can't see that is the reason you're all going to lose to him. I know him better than any person alive, which is the reason I'm the one who did the sums in the first place. He's not coming with fire, he told the team to go home. He told the Aurors in the atrium he wasn't going to hurt them and to remember he said it. That's not mercy, that's positioning. He's building a case. He's going to surface in the open, somewhere we can't suppress, and he's going to make us say what we did out loud in front of everyone, and then he's going to stand back and let the world do to us what he's too careful to do himself. She finally looked up, and what was in her face was the thing none of the men had let into theirs, which was the specific horror of a person who has gambled everything on being right and is watching the evidence come in. I didn't do this because I hate him. I did it because I love him and I was afraid of what he'd become. And now I've made him exactly that 2 years early with my own wand, and the only thing left that I can do is the same thing I did the first time, which is to find the answer nobody else is brave enough to build. She put her hand flat on the schematics. There's a way, it isn't killing him, you can't kill him, Croker's right, that road's closed, but the veil doesn't have to take him to hold him. There are older workings, bindings. Ways to put a thing outside where it can't be reached and can't reach back. I've started. I'll need the department and the unspeakables, and I'll probably need the Confederation before the end. But it can be done, it has to be done, because I'm the one who let it out and I'm not going to leave it for our children to deal with. Pike looked at her for a long moment. And if he comes for you first, Hermione's hands tightened on the cold cup. Then I'd better build faster than he can plan, she said, and went back to her diagrams and did not sleep. And that was the morning the people who had murdered Harry Potter stopped being a conspiracy and started being 4 frightened people in a room, each building in their separate ways the instrument of their own reckoning. Luna found him before he found her, which was the way it had always gone with Luna. He had gone north and west out of the forest, toward the only door in his life that still opened both ways and the one person he thought might stand in it without flinching, and he had got as far as a hill above the village of Ottery St. Catchpole, near where the strange tilted house of the Lovegoods leaned against the evening sky, when he found her sitting on a stile in the last of the light, swinging her feet, waiting as though they had arranged it. You took longer than I thought, Luna said. I've been here since Tuesday. I told Daddy I was watching for a flock of something. He doesn't ask anymore. She looked at him with her pale, protuberant eyes, and she looked at him the way she looked at everything, directly and entirely, and she did not flinch, and Harry understood that she had known before anyone, before the Aurors, before the Prophet, before perhaps even he had come back up the road, that he was not dead. You feel different, she said. You feel like the edge of a very deep lake. The kind you can't see the bottom of even when it's clear. Hello, Luna, Harry said, and was surprised to find his voice rough. They had your funeral on Sunday, she said. She said it the way she said everything, gently and without weight, a child reporting the color of the sky. It was very sad and everyone cried, which I thought was strange because you weren't in the box. I could tell from the back of the room. Boxes feel a certain way when there's someone in them, and that one felt like a box. Nobody else seemed to notice. I think people see what they've decided to see. She tilted her head. I didn't cry. Ginny thought I was being cold. I couldn't very well tell her I knew you'd be coming back because I didn't know how, only that you would, the way you know a tune's not finished even when the man stops playing. He sat down on the stile beside her because his legs, which did not tire, wanted suddenly to not be holding him up. And for a while the two of them sat in the dusk and looked at the lights coming on in the valley, and Harry told her, because she was the only person alive he could tell and because she would neither break nor run, what had been done to him under the city and what had happened on the far side of the door and what he had brought back. He told it flat and complete the way he told everything, and Luna listened with her hands folded in her lap, and when he came to the part about the cold that had no door left in it, she nodded the way you nod at a thing about the structure of the world that you have long suspected and finally heard confirmed. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard," she said when he was done, "and it isn't the part you think it is." "Which part is it then?" "You said the worst part is that you can't reach them. Your mum and Sirius and the others." She turned her clear eyes on him. "But you've never been able to reach them, Harry. None of us can. That's not new. You had a stone once that made it look like you could, but it was just a sad kind of looking. The worst part isn't that the door's shut to you. The worst part is that it's still open to everyone else." She said it without any cruelty, the way she said everything, and it went into him like the wand point into his palm, deep and clean and slow to close. "Everyone you love is going to walk through it. And you're going to stand on this side and watch the whole of it over and over for as long as there's a world, and you'll never get to be on the far side waiting for them the way your mum's waiting for you. That's the cost, not that you're locked out, that you'll always be the one left in the room." Harry sat on the stile in the dark and did not answer for a long time. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he said at last. "Everyone's afraid of me. The Aurors, Croaker, a 4-year-old, screamed when I picked him up before any of this just because of what was coming off me. You're the only one who isn't, and you've got more reason than most. I'm sitting next to you with no bottom to me. Why aren't you afraid?" Luna considered the question with the seriousness she gave to all the wrong-sized questions other people threw away. "Because being afraid of you wouldn't be true," she said. "You're frightening, but that's a different thing from being someone to fear. A storm is frightening. You don't hate the storm, you just don't stand under the tree." She swung her feet. "Hermione's afraid of you. That's the difference between us, really. She decided the true thing about you was the frightening part, and once you decide that, you have to do something about it, because a person can't live next to a thing they've decided to fear. I decided the true thing about you was that you've spent your whole life with everyone you love being taken away, and you've never once, not even now, taken anyone back out of spite. That's the true thing. The others just weather." She paused. "Are you going to kill them, the ones who did it?" It was the question asked plainly by the one person who could ask it plainly, and Harry found that he had been waiting 4 days for someone to ask it so that he could find out what he thought by hearing himself answer. "No," he said, and was a little surprised to find it was the truth. "I can't. That's the thing none of them understand yet. I can't give them what I can't have. If I kill Pike, I send him through the door I'm locked out of. I'd be doing him a mercy I'll never get. Every one of them is going to walk through it anyway in 40 years or 50, free, into the warm, into whatever's waiting, and I'm going to stand in the hedge and watch them go, the same as I'll watch you go, the same as I'll watch Teddy go. Killing them isn't a punishment, it's a graduation." He looked at his hands. "No, I'm not going to kill them. I'm going to do something they'll find much harder to forgive me for. I'm going to make them account for it. Every one of them in the open in front of the world they lied to. I'm going to take away the story they told and put the true one in its place and stand there while they live in it. That's the reckoning, not the veil, the truth, and the rest of their short, ordinary lives to sit in it." Luna nodded slowly, the way she received any other perfectly reasonable migration pattern. "That's a kinder thing than they did to you," she said, "and a crueler one. I think that's right. I think that's exactly the line you have to walk, the kind one and the cruel one at the same time, because the moment you fall off it on the cruel side you become the thing Hermione was afraid of, and then she was right all along, and you can't let her be right, Harry, not after what it cost." She hopped down off the stile and stood looking up at him in the dark. "You should know they're frightened, properly frightened, the ones who know. They've kept it quiet, that you're back. The Prophet doesn't have it. Most of the Ministry doesn't have it. Only Pike and Robards and Hermione and the few they trust to keep their mouths shut. They put it about that the Aurors who saw you were drunk or curse-saddled. They're trying to bury you a second time, with silence this time instead of a box, and it isn't working because the ones who saw you can't unsee it, and the story's leaking out the bottom of the building no matter how hard they hold the lid on." She tilted her head. "Hermione's building something, I don't know what. She's been in the Department of Mysteries every night since the funeral with Croaker, and she stopped sleeping. And when I passed her in the village, she looked at me the way she does her sums, which is how she looks at everyone now, like everyone's a number and a problem she has to solve before something terrible happens. She's the one to watch. The minister's only frightened of you. Hermione's frightened she was right, and that's so much worse because a person who's frightened they were right will burn down the world to keep from finding out they were wrong." "I know," Harry said. "She always was the dangerous one. Everyone always thought it was me." Luna smiled at him then, the strange luminous smile that had comforted dying men in a war, and she reached up and put her cold, small hand flat against his chest over the place where the storm was, and she did not flinch at what she felt there. "Still in there," she said softly. "Good, mind you keep it. The day I put my hand here and there's nothing but the lake, I'll be afraid of you, and I'll be right to be, and I'd hate that more than anything. So don't let it happen. Promise me you'll come and let me check now and then. Put your hand here," and she pressed his palm flat to his own chest, "and if you can't find it yourself, come and find me and I'll find it for you. I'm good at finding things that are there when everyone says they aren't." "I'll outlive you, Luna," Harry said. It came out of him before he could keep it back, and it was the most naked thing he had said to anyone since the cloth touched his face from the inside. "I'll come to check, and 1 year you won't be there." "Yes," she said, simply unafraid, the way she met every true and terrible thing. But not yet, and until then I'm here and you should use me while you've got me because that's what people are for. Now come and have some soup. Daddy's made it purple. He's very proud. You don't have to eat it. You just have to let him be proud of it, which is a different kind of kindness, and you're going to need to get very good at the different kinds of kindness, Harry, where you're going. Practice on the soup. He went down the hill with her in the dark, toward the one warm lit window in the valley that he was allowed to walk into, and he ate 3 spoonfuls of purple soup that he did not need and could barely taste, and let an odd gentle man be proud of it, and it was, he thought, sitting in that crooked bright kitchen with the cold sitting patient in his marrow, the most important thing he had done since he died. Xenophilius talked the whole time about crumplehorned snorkax and the conspiracies of Pike's ministry and the proper way to roast a dirigible plum, and never once asked Harry a hard question. And Harry understood that the old man had recognized something in him and had decided in his own strange way to give him an hour in which nothing was required of him but to sit in the warm and be talked at. And he was grateful for it in a way he did not have the words to say and did not try to. He left before dawn the way he left everywhere now, and he walked out into the fields with the reckoning settling into its shape behind his eyes, cold and clear and complete. He had the method now. Luna had helped him find it without meaning to, the way she helped with most things. He would not kill them. He would do the harder thing and the crueler thing at once. He would unbury himself in the open, in front of the world they had lied to, and he would make each of them account by their own mouths for what they had done, and then he would leave them their small, free mortal lives to live inside the truth. He would start with the ones who had only followed and work inward toward the ones who had decided, and he would save for last the 2 who had loved him because they were the ones who had known him best and feared him anyway, and their accounting would be the one the world remembered. He thought about where to begin walking through the wet gray fields, and he found that the answer was already waiting, the way the answers waited now, frictionless, certain. He would begin with the man who had built the bottle. Not because Croaker was the cruelest of them, but because Croaker was the most honest. And an honest man made to account in the open would do half Harry's work for him, would explain to the watching world in his careful measuring voice exactly what had been done and exactly why it had not worked. And the wizarding world would hear from the lips of the most careful man in the ministry that they had murdered their savior out of fear, and that murder had not taken. Croaker would tell the truth because Croaker could not help it. And once the truth was out of the bottle, no amount of silence Pike could buy would put it back. The sun came up gray behind him as he walked, and somewhere far to the east, in a stone room under the city, Hermione Granger sat at a table covered in the schematics of things that should not be possible, and did not sleep, and did the only thing she had ever known how to do with a fear she could not argue away, which was to build the answer to it, and she did not yet know, bent over her impossible diagrams in the lamplight, that the thing she was afraid of had just chosen. In a wet field 100 miles north to come and find her last. Harry walked on into the dawn. He could not feel, patient, unhurried, owning all the time there had ever been, and behind him the cold kept its place in his marrow and the storm kept its place in his chest, where a strange, unafraid girl had pressed his own hand flat and told him to keep it, and he meant to. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The dead man's ledger. He chose noon, and he chose Diagon Alley because a thing done in the dark can be denied, and he was finished being denied. It was a Wednesday market day, 11 days after they had thrown him through the veil, and the alley was as full as it ever got. The crowd thick between Gringotts and the apothecary, witches haggling over winter stores, a knot of Hogwarts-bound children pressed to the window of the broom shop, the ordinary loud bright commerce of a people who had been told 11 days ago that their savior had died of a wasting illness and had wept and lit candles and were now in the way of the living. Getting on with the buying of cauldrons. The black mourning ribbons were still up over the shop fronts. There was a hastily hung banner across the mouth of Nocturne that read "Rest in Peace" in silver letters that had begun to peel. Harry came up the alley from the leaky end on foot in daylight with his face uncovered, and for the length of perhaps 30 seconds nothing happened, because the human eye does not look for the impossible, and the crowd's eyes slid over him the way Andromeda's had slid over the hedge, seeing what they had decided to see, which was a thin dark-haired man in a plain coat, no one a stranger. Then a woman dropped a jar. He never knew which jar or which woman. He heard it break on the cobbles, the wet smash of it, and he saw her face over the broken glass, white, her hands still curled around the shape of the thing she had been holding, and her mouth open and her eyes on him, and he watched the recognition go through her and out of her into the people on either side, the way fire goes along a line of dry grass, the way the silence had thinned in Molly's kitchen, except in reverse, a silence spreading out from the broken jar in a widening ring, shop by shop, face by face, until the whole loud bright alley had gone utterly still, and every eye in it was on the dead man walking up the middle of the road at noon. He kept walking. That was the thing. He did not stop, and he did not speak, and he did not raise a hand. He walked up the center of Diagon Alley at an unhurried pace, the way a man walks who has somewhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. And the crowd came apart in front of him like water in front of a hull, pressing back against the shop fronts, mothers pulling children behind their skirts, a young wizard fumbling his wand half out, and then thinking better of it because there was nothing here to point it at, nothing he could name. An old man on the apothecary step took off his hat, the way you do at a hearse, and did not seem to know he had done it. Somebody said his name, then somebody else, and then it was running up the alley ahead of him. Potter, that's Potter, it's Harry Potter, he's dead, that's Harry Potter. The two halves of the sentence colliding in the air and making a sound that was not quite words and not quite weeping. He stopped in the middle of the alley in the open where the most people could see him, and he turned slowly so that the dead man's living face was shown to all of them. The ones at the broom shop window and the ones on the Gringotts steps and the ones leaning out of the upper windows now drawn by the silence, and he said into the held breath of the whole street in a voice that did not need to be loud because the silence carried it. I'm not dead. They told you I was. I want you to remember in the days that come that you saw me with your own eyes alive in the daylight, and that the people who buried me knew exactly where I was the whole time because they're the ones who put me where they thought I'd stay. He let his eyes move over the frozen crowd, and there was no threat in his face, and that was what fixed them in place, the absence of the threat, the calm of it. I'm going to the ministry now, you should come. You've a right to hear what's said there, and they'd very much rather you didn't, which is exactly why you should. And he turned and walked on toward the ministry visitors' entrance, and behind him, after a moment, the alley emptied itself in his wake, the whole market day crowd abandoning its cauldrons and its winter stores and falling in behind the dead man, 100 of them, then 300, a slow gathering river of the people Pike had lied to flowing up out of Diagon Alley toward the seat of the government that had told them their hero was at peace. Some of them were weeping as they came. Some were afraid. He could feel the fear in the crowd like a current under the river, the question already forming in them that Pike would spend the next weeks watering. But they came. Whatever they felt, they came, because there is nothing on earth a people will not follow through a door if the door has just been opened by a man they had buried. The lid was off the bottle. There was no putting it back. The Wisengamot was an emergency session, which Harry had known it would be, because 300 people seeing a dead man in Diagon Alley at noon was precisely the kind of fire that pulls a frightened government into one room to decide what to say about it. They had convened in the great court on the lowest level, the amphitheater of dark benches where Harry had once been tried at 15 for the crime of defending his own life. The irony was not lost on him. Few things were lost on him now. The chamber was full, the red-robed members of the court ranged up the rising tiers, the minister's high seat at the center, and the doors were warded and guarded because Pike was not a fool and had understood, the moment the reports came up from the alley, that the next place the dead man would walk was here. The doors did not stop him. He had not expected them to, and they did not. He simply asked the wards on them to forget they were wards, the way he had asked the runes in the chamber and the lattice in the wood, and the great sealed doors of the highest court in magical Britain swung open of their own accord onto a silence even deeper than the one in the alley, and Harry Potter walked into his own trial 2 years late to find that this time he was not the one in the dock. He came down the long aisle to the floor of the court, and behind him, through the doors he had opened, the people came too, the river from Diagon Alley spilling into the public gallery that no emergency session was supposed to have admitted, filling it. 300 witnesses Pike could not silence, and Harry watched the minister's face do the arithmetic and find no answer in it. This is a closed session, Pike said. His voice was steady. Harry gave him that. The man's nerve was real, whatever else was. These proceedings are open now, Harry said. I opened them, you'll want to get used to that. Doors are going to keep opening for me whether you've sealed them or not, and I've decided the thing to do with that is to open them in front of as many people as possible so that nothing more gets decided about me in a room I'm not allowed into. He reached the floor and stopped and turned not to the minister, but to the small gray man seated among the unspeakables on the lower tier who had gone very still. Hello, Croaker, I'd like you to come down here, please. Croaker did not move. Around the chamber wands were appearing, the court's guard and the aurors at the doors and half the members of the Wisengamot themselves, 100 points of readiness aimed at the floor, and Harry stood in the center of all of them with his hands open at his sides and did not so much as glance at the wands, because the wands were the least interesting thing in the room and everyone in it was beginning to understand that. Mr. Potter, Pike again, and now there was an edge under the steadiness. Whatever you believe was done to you, I don't believe anything, Harry said. I know I was there, so were you. So was your head of the Auror office, who's a senior undersecretary now, which I noticed was announced the same morning as my funeral. His eyes found Robards on the floor of the court, broad and gray and very still, one hand at his wrist. And so was Croaker, who built the thing that was supposed to hold me while you did it. I'm not here to tell the court what happened, Minister. You'd only say I was mad or dark or not really Harry Potter at all, some clever imposter, and a frightened court might even believe you because it would so badly like to, so I'm not going to tell them anything. He turned back to the gray man on the lower tier. Croaker's going to tell them. Come down, Croaker, you're the most honest man in this building. It's the only nice thing I can say about any of you, and I mean it. Come and be honest one more time where they can hear you. I am not going to perform for you, Croaker said. His voice was thin, but it held. Whatever you are now. I built what I was asked to build, and I will answer to this court for it in the ordinary way, under oath in a closed. You'll answer now, Harry said, and he did not raise his voice, and the temperature of the room dropped not by magic he had cast, but by the simple fact of his attention turning fully onto one man, the way the temperature drops when a cloud crosses the sun. I'm not going to make you. I want that on the record, too. I'm not going to reach into your head and pull it out, the way I could, the way you'd all expect a dark thing to do, because that would prove every story Pike's going to tell about me, and I won't do his work for him. I'm going to stand here and I'm going to ask you and you're going to tell the truth because you're a careful man and you spent 11 days knowing that you helped murder an innocent person and that it didn't take, and a careful man can't carry that and stay careful. It's eating you. I can see it eating you. Put it down. Tell them what you measured and what you built and what you did with it. Tell them, and then it's theirs to carry, not just yours. The chamber held its breath. 300 witnesses in the gallery, 100 wands on the floor, the minister rigid in his high seat, and the small gray man on the lower tier with his careful life coming apart behind his eyes, and Harry Potter standing in the center of it asking in a level voice for nothing but the truth. Croker told them. He told it the way he told everything, precisely, without color, which was 1,000 times worse than any speech because the precision was its own indictment. He told them about the measurements, the instrument with the scale and the top of the scale, the man who came in above the top of it. He told them about the review conducted at the highest level in closed session and the vote. He told them about the bottle he had built in the death chamber, tuned to the particular shape of one man's magic, and about the owl sent down a chimney with a lie about a remnant, and about the careful regret on the minister's face, and about the severing charm and the dragging and the throwing, and about the veil, the one door in the world that opened only one way, and how they had used it precisely so that there would be no body and no grave and nothing to bring back. And then he told them in the same flat measuring voice that 11 days later the man they had put through that door had walked back out of it, and that nothing they had since thrown at him had so much as touched him, and that every attempt they made was making him stronger, and that he, Saul Croker, the most careful man in the ministry, had measured the result and could no longer find a number for it. He did not spare himself. That was the thing that turned the court. A lesser man would have hidden behind the vote, behind the order, behind the greater good, and Croker had the greater good available to him and did not reach for it. He said at the end in the same flat voice, "I want the record to show that I was not ordered to enjoy the elegance of it, and that I did. I built the cleanest cage of my life to hold a man who had never done me harm, and I was proud of the joinery. That is the part the court should weigh, not that we were afraid. Anyone may be afraid. That those of us who were clever enough to build the cage were proud of building it." And he sat down and folded his hands and waited the way a man waits who has finally set down a thing too heavy to carry and does not yet know whether he will be able to stand back up without it. When he finished, the silence in the court was the silence of the chamber under the city, the held breath of a sealed and forgotten place. And then a member of the Wisengamot, an old witch in the upper tier who had wept at the funeral 11 days ago, did the thing that broke it. She turned in her seat away from the floor, away from Harry, and looked at the minister, and she said in a voice that shook, "Is it true?" And the question went round the chamber and up the tiers, "Is it true? Is it true?" 100 faces turning from the dead man on the floor to the living man in the high seat, and Harry understood that the reckoning had begun, that he had done the thing he set out to do, that he had taken the story away from them and put the true one in its place, and that he had not had to lift his hand to do it. That was the moment Robards decided he had nothing left to lose. Harry felt it before it came, the way he felt all of it now, the small intention gathering in the broad gray man on the floor of the court, and he understood that they had not come to an emergency session unprepared, that there was a thing built into the floor of this chamber as there had been built into the walls of the last one, and that Robards had been standing on the trigger of it the whole time, waiting for the order or the nerve. The nerve came first. The senior undersecretary for magical defense brought his wand down hard against the dark stone of the court floor and spoke a word, and the trigger took. It was a binding, an old and enormous one, the work, Harry would learn, of 3 weeks in most of the Department of Mysteries, a thing they had laid into the bones of the court against exactly this hour. Chains of light erupted from the floor of the amphitheater, not iron but pure bound magic, the color of old gold, a dozen of them, then 100. Lashing up and around the place where Harry stood, a cocoon of binding strong enough, Croker had promised, to hold a risen god, and for half a second the whole court saw the dead man wrapped in a blaze of golden chains, and the half of them that had loved him flinched, and the half that feared him exhaled. Then the chains reached for the part of him they were built to bind, and found it already gone, and the binding did what every binding had done, what the runes and the lattice and the iron frame had done. It guttered. It found nothing in him to wrap, no will to chain because his will was not stored in a place a chain could reach, no body to hold because his body was a courtesy he paid to a memory, and the golden chains passed into him and through him and out and went dark and crumbled and rained down across the court floor as a fine gray ash, and where they had broken against him the cold came up out of his marrow and into the chamber, and 300 candles guttered low at once. And Harry was larger. It was not a thing the eye could measure, and every eye in the chamber measured it anyway. He had not grown, he was the same thin dark-haired man in the plain coat, and he was, after the binding broke on him, unmistakably more the way a held note is more than a struck one, the way the deepest part of the night is more than its edges, and the court that had flinched and the court that had exhaled now sat as one frozen thing and looked at what their last and greatest binding had refined, and understood all of them together in a single breath, the thing Croker had been trying to tell them. That there was nothing to be done, that you could not win and you could not lose, that every door they closed on him made him stronger and there were not enough doors in the world. That was the binding you spent 3 weeks on, Harry said, into the ash and the guttering candlelight, and he was looking at Robards and his voice was very quiet. I felt you laying it, I let you finish. I wanted the court to see it break so that no one in this room ever wastes another hour believing there's a clever enough cage. There isn't, you made certain of that yourselves on a dais 11 nights ago. He looked up away from Robards to the high seat. I'm not going to do anything to any of you today, I want that understood. I came here to take your story away, and I've done it, and now I'm going to leave, and you're going to spend tonight in your homes deciding what kind of people you've been, and the court is going to spend it deciding what kind of government it wants to be now that it knows what this one did in its name. He turned and started back up the long aisle toward the gallery and the 300 silent witnesses. Don't send anyone else into a wood after me, the next dead oak's on you. He walked out of the court of the Wisengamot through the doors he had opened, and the people of Diagon Alley parted before him and then closed behind him and followed him out into the daylight. And behind him in the chamber Eldon Pike sat in his high seat and watched his entire government turn slowly to look at him, and knew that the silence he had bought with a white coffin and a peeling banner was spent, and that he was, for the first time since he had taken the high seat, a man with nothing left to spend. The prophet could not be silenced after that because the prophet did not have to invent it. 300 people had stood in the public gallery and heard the most careful man in the ministry describe, in his own flat voice, the murder of Harry Potter, and 300 people went home and told 3,000, and by the morning edition the story had outrun any version Pike's people could shape. The headline was 4 words and it took up half the page: they killed Him first. Underneath it, smaller, the thing the whole country was now asking and no one could answer. And he came back. What is he now? Harry read it the way he read everything, flat, complete, in the doorway of a derelict house on the edge of a Muggle town where no one would think to look for a force of nature. He did not feel triumph. He had expected to feel something surfacing into the open, breaking the lie, and what he felt instead was the thing he was beginning to recognize as the texture of his new existence, which was a vast cold patience with a small warm ache buried very deep inside it, the ache being the only part of him he still entirely trusted. The lie was broken. The reckoning had its first true page. And none of it had given him back the one thing he wanted, which was a door that opened both ways and a kitchen with a light on and the small ordinary right to be tired. The ministry's response came within 2 days, and it was, Harry thought, exactly the response a frightened clever man makes when his power has slipped. Pike stopped trying to deny and started trying to govern the fear. He gave a speech. He stood at a lectern with the careful regret back on his face like a coat fetched from where he dropped it, and he said that mistakes had been made, grave mistakes, by people who had believed, rightly or wrongly, that they were protecting the wizarding world from an unprecedented danger, and that there would be an inquiry in time and accountability in time, but that the danger itself had not gone away. That whatever Harry Potter had once been, the thing that walked the country now was not a man and could not be reasoned with as a man, that it had broken the highest court's most powerful binding and grown stronger doing it, and that the only responsible course was for the public to stay calm, stay clear, and trust their government to find a way to contain a threat that no individual could face. He did not say kill. He had learned that much. He said contain. He said it 11 times. It was good politics. Harry watched the country take it up in the prophet's pages and the talk of the pubs, the fear curdling into the oldest and most useful shape. The shape that asks not what was done to him, but what is he now and what will he do to us? And he understood that this was the long game Pike would play, that he could not kill Harry or cage him, so he would try to make him into a monster in the public mind, a thing the world had to be protected from. So that whatever the inquiry found about a murder under the city would be drowned out by the louder question of the unkillable thing walking the moors. And it would work on most of them because fear always works on most of them, but not all. The seed was planted now. 300 people had heard the truth in Croker's own voice, and a planted truth is patient, and Harry had learned a great deal lately about patience. He let Pike have his speech. He had a longer game of his own and the next page of the ledger to write. Gawain Robards lived alone in a narrow house in a wizarding terrace in the north of the city, and Harry came to him there the second night after the court, not over the threshold but waiting in the front room when the man came down in the small hours because he could not sleep. The way the men who had murdered Harry Potter could none of them, it seemed, sleep. Robards came down the stairs with his wand already in his hand, because 30 years of being an Auror does not switch off, and he found the dead man sitting in the armchair by the cold grate with his hands folded, and he stopped on the bottom step, and he did the thing Harry had not expected and respected him for. He did not raise the wand. He looked at it in his own hand as though it belonged to a stranger, and then he set it down on the side table deliberately and stood there empty-handed in his nightshirt, an old gray soldier who had run out of war. I'm not going to fight you, Robards said. I've seen what fighting you does. I watched a binding that took the department 3 weeks come apart like wet paper, and I watched you get bigger when it broke, and I'm done. Whatever you came to do, do it. I won't insult either of us by pretending I can stop you. I didn't come to do anything to you, Harry said. I came to ask you a question, and I think you already know what it is because I think it's the same question that's had you walking your house at 3 in the morning, so I'll save us both the time. He looked at the broad gray man standing empty-handed on the stairs. Why did you do it with your own hands? Robards' face did something complicated. You didn't have to, Harry went on level. You're the head of the Auror office. You had a dozen people in that chamber who'd have dragged me to the Vale on your order, and you'd never have had to touch me. You could have stood at the back with Pike and kept your hands clean and let the order be the thing that did it. But it wasn't an order that put its hands under my arms and swung me into that arch. It was you. I felt your hands. I want to know why a man chooses that when he didn't have to. The old Auror was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice had gone rough. Because I wasn't going to make a boy of 23 do the thing I'd voted for, Robard said. That's the truth, and it's no better than the lie, so I'll give you the truth. I sat in that closed session and I heard Croker's numbers and I believed them, that you'd outlive us all and outgrow us all and that one day there'd be no stopping you, and I voted with the rest. And once I'd voted, I wasn't going to stand at the back in a clean robe and watch some 23-year-old I'd trained carry out my decision and have it on his soul instead of mine. If it was going to be done, I decided it, so I'd do it, with my hands. That's the only decent thing in the whole rotten business, and it's the thing I can't live with, do you understand? Because the decent part and the monstrous part are the same act. I threw you through that door so a younger man wouldn't have to, and that makes me the best of them and the worst of them at the same time. And I've been walking this house every night since trying to work out which, and I can't, and I never will. Harry sat in the armchair and looked at him, and the cold sat in his marrow and looked at him too, and he understood that this was the cruelty of his reckoning, the one Luna had warned him about, that the people he had to account were not monsters, that they were people who had done a monstrous thing for reasons a man could almost respect, and that making them say it out loud was crueler than killing them precisely because they were not monsters and would have to live as themselves inside what they had said. I'm not going to send you through anything, Gawain, Harry said. I can't, I've nothing to send you to that you won't get to anyway in 20 years for free the way I never will. So here's what I want instead, and it's the only thing I'll ever ask of you. Tomorrow you're going to resign in the open and you're going to tell the truth about what you did with your own hands, all of it, the decent part and the monstrous part, the way you just told me. Not because I'll hurt you if you don't, I won't. But because you're the man who'd throw himself through the door so a younger man wouldn't have to. And there's a version of this country's future where Pike uses people like you to do worse things than the Vale in the name of containing me, and the only way to stop that is for the country to hear from the best soldier in it that following the order was the thing he can't live with. You can be the warning, Gawain. It's more than you deserve and less than you're worth, and it's the only mercy I've got left in me to give. Take it. And Robards, who had thrown Harry Potter through the veil with his own hands, sat down slowly on the bottom step of his own stairs and put his face in his hands. And Harry left him there in the dark with his wand on the side table and his account to settle in the morning. And the next day the senior undersecretary for magical defense resigned in the open and told the truth, all of it. And Pike's careful speech about containing the unkillable thing was buried on the third page under the confession of the best soldier in the country, and the ledger had its second true page, written again without Harry raising his hand. Ginny found him on the fourth night after the court, and she found him because he let her, which was a thing he admitted to himself only after it was done. He had gone back to the rise above Andromeda's cottage because he could not entirely keep away from the one warm window he was allowed to want, and he had been standing in the wet dark watching the light in the kitchen go out, one room at a time, when he felt her come up the lane behind him, and he knew the shape of her the way you know a hand you have held, and he did not turn and he did not vanish, and that was the letting. They said you'd come here, Ginny said. She stopped a careful distance back on the lane, and her wand was in her hand, not raised, just held, the way Ron's had been held in the chamber, the way the living hold a thing they have brought and hope not to need. Luna said it. She said you'd not be able to stay away from Teddy, that you'd watch the window and never go in. She was right. She's always right, and it's the most infuriating thing about her. Her voice was steady, and it cost her to keep it so. He could hear the cost in it. Turn around, Harry. If you're going to make me do this to the back of your head, I'll never forgive you, and I've got a long enough list of things not to forgive you for already. He turned around. She had not changed, and she had changed entirely. 2 years in a war and 11 days of grief, and she stood in the lane in the dark with the rain in her hair, 20 years old, and she looked at his face the way the woman in Diagon Alley had looked at him over the broken jar, except that under the shock there was something the woman in the alley had not had any right to, a grief so specific and so old that it had worn a groove in her the way the noticing had worn one in him. You let me bury you, Ginny said. I stood in that room and looked at a white box and I believed it. I believed you were in it. I cried until I was sick, Harry, and the whole time you were. Her voice cracked and she mastered it, the Weasley jaw, the same jaw Ron had, and the resemblance went through Harry like the wand point. Where were you after when you came back and the Aurors saw you and you walked out into London? Where did you go? You went to Luna. You went to Hill to watch a baby through a window. You went everywhere except to me, and I want to know why, and I want the true answer, not the kind one. I'm done with kind. I've had 11 days of people being kind to me about you. Because your brother was in the chamber, Harry said. It landed the way he had known it would. She had known it too, he saw somewhere. She had heard the names read out in the court the way the whole country had, but knowing a thing and hearing it said in the dark by the man it was done to are different sizes of the same wound. He didn't cast, Harry said, because it was true and because he found he could not stand in the lane with her and take that from her too. I want you to know that, whatever else. They built a thing to hold me and a dozen of them came at me at once, and your brother stood there with his wand up and his arm shaking, and he never cast a single spell. Hermione did the severing charm. Robards and another man dragged me to the Vale. Ron dropped his wand on the floor and watched, and at the end he said something to me, 2 words, and I couldn't hear them over the voices, and I've spent 11 days not knowing what they were. So no, he didn't strike me, but he was there, Ginny. He was there because he was afraid of me, and he let it happen because he was afraid of me. And the reason I went to Hill and a strange girl and not to you is that I couldn't stand in front of you knowing what your family let be done to me and watch you decide whose side you were on. I'd rather not know. As long as I don't ask you, I get to keep believing you'd have stopped it. The moment I ask, I might find out you'd have done the sums too. Ginny was crying now openly in the rain, and she did not wipe it away, and her wand hand had dropped to her side. I'd have stopped it, she said. You absolute coward, you let yourself be murdered rather than ask me whether I loved you enough to stop it. I'd have burned the whole ministry down. I'd have burned my own family down, do you hear me? I'd have stood on that dais and dared the lot of them. And you knew that, that's why you didn't ask. Because if you'd asked, you'd have had a reason to live, and some part of you didn't want one, some part of you was so tired you let them do it. I know you, Harry, I know exactly what you are, and it isn't the thing Pike's putting in the papers. You're a man who was so tired of being the one everyone needed that when the people you loved decided you were too dangerous to live, the tiredest part of you agreed with them. She took a step closer and another, and she stopped just out of reach because there was a cold coming off him now that even she could feel, and they both knew it, and that was the cruelest thing in the lane. And now you can't even die, that's the joke, isn't it? The one thing you were too tired to keep fighting for they took away. You'll never get to be tired again, you'll never get to put it down. No, Harry said, I won't. Can I touch you, Ginny said, or will it? It won't hurt you, he said. Nothing I do can hurt you, that's not the problem. But he understood what she was asking under the words, and he understood that the honest answer to it was the cruelest thing he would say to anyone that whole long night, crueler than anything he had said to Croaker or Pike or Robards, and he said it anyway because she had asked for the true answer and not the kind one, and he owed her at least that. Ginny, listen to me, you're 20. You're going to have 60 more years, if you're lucky, 60 good years, and at the end of them you're going to walk through a door I'm locked out of into the warm where your father is, where Fred is, and I'm going to be exactly here, not older, not changed, standing on this rise or one like it, watching another window go dark. If you come back to me now, all you're buying is a front row seat to your own funeral, with a man who'll grieve you for 10,000 years and never once be able to follow you. That's not love, that's a sentence, and I won't do it to you. I love you too much to let you spend your one mortal life keeping a corpse company. He made himself say the last of it. Go and live, marry someone who'll grow old with you and be in the box when it's a real box. Let me be the thing you cried over for 11 days. It's the kindest version of me you'll ever get, and I want you to have it. Ginny looked at him for a long time in the rain. You don't get to decide that for me, she said at last, very quietly. That's the same thing they did, Harry. They decided what was best for everyone in a room you weren't allowed into, and you hated them for it, and now you're standing in a lane deciding the best thing for me without asking what I want. You've become the thing you came back to punish, just gentler about it. And before he could answer, she turned and walked back down the lane into the dark. And she did not look back, and Harry stood on the rise and let the one truth she had left him sink all the way to the bottom of the cold where it would stay. He understood for a very long time that the line he had to walk was even narrower than Luna had said, that a man could fall off it on the cruel side without ever raising his hand, just by loving people from too far away and calling the distance kindness. The kitchen light was out, the cottage was dark. Somewhere in it a 4-year-old slept who would, one day in 60 years, walk through the door and Harry would still be standing on the rise. He stayed until dawn because there was no one to send him away, and then he went to begin the next page of the ledger, the one he had been saving, the one with the 2 names on it he had carried longest, and he took Ginny's last words with him the way he carried the folded newspaper of his own funeral, a thing a man should keep evidence in the case he was building against the person he might yet become. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The ledger balanced. Ron was drunk when Harry came for him, and Harry had known he would be because the country had been talking of nothing else for a week, and a man who had stood in a chamber and watched his best friend murdered and then watched him walk out of Diagon Alley alive does not stay sober through that, not a man like Ron, who had never in his life found a feeling he could leave undrowned. He was not at the flat with the half-painted nursery. Harry had gone there first and found it dark and cold, the cot still in its box against the wall, a layer of dust on the kitchen table that said no one had lived there in days, and he had understood looking at the unbuilt cot that the marriage that was supposed to fill these rooms had not survived the dais either, that the thing they had done together had not bound Ron and Hermione closer but had cracked them apart along the fault line of how each of them carried it, she into building and he into the bottle. So Harry went to the place a Weasley goes when the world ends, which is the burrow, and he found Ron in the orchard behind it in the dark, sitting against the trunk of one of the gnarled apple trees with a bottle of fire whiskey 3/4 gone, looking up at the gaps in the branches where the stars were. I knew you'd come here, Ron said without turning his head. His voice was thick. Been waiting. Mum doesn't know I'm out here. She thinks I'm asleep. Everyone thinks I'm asleep. I haven't slept since. He stopped. He drank. Since. Harry sat down against the next tree a few feet away and did not say anything because he had learned lately the different kinds of silence, and this was a silence that needed to be let alone to find its own way to speech. You going to do it? Ron said after a while. He still had not looked at Harry. He looked up at the stars through the branches. Whatever you do to the others, Croaker's gone to pieces, they say. Robards resigned, told the whole truth, brave old bastard, braver than me. You going to come for me too, make me stand up in front of everyone and say what I did? He laughed, a wet, broken sound. Joke's on you, mate, I can't even stand up. Look, try me, go on. I'm not going to make you account in front of anyone, Ron, Harry said. Now Ron looked at him. In the dark his face was a ruin, swollen and unshaven and wet, the freckles standing out the way they had in the chamber, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who's been waiting in an orchard for a week for the one person who can tell him what he is. Why not? Ron said. I deserve it more than Croaker. I deserve it more than any of them. I was your best mate 12 years. I followed you down into the chamber and into the forest and into the bloody ministry the first time when we were kids, when it was you and me against all of it, and then I stood in that room and I let them." His voice broke entirely. "I let them, so make me say it in front of everyone. It's what I deserve, make me." "That's exactly why I won't," Harry said. The cold sat in his marrow and he let it sit, and he looked at the wreck of the person who had been his first friend, and he found, examining himself, that the thing he felt was not the thing he had expected to feel sitting in this orchard. He had expected the wound to be hottest here, instead it was the clearest. He had had 11 days, and the place that had been ragged in the chamber had healed over the way his palm healed, smooth and seamless and somehow worse for the seamlessness, and what was left where the heat should have been was a terrible cold clarity about the man in front of him. "You want me to punish you," Harry said. "That's what this is. You've been sitting in this orchard for a week wanting me to come and be the villain of it. Because if I'm the villain, then you're just a frightened man who got swept up in a terrible thing, and you can be forgiven, eventually, the way frightened men get forgiven. You want me to make you stand up in front of the world and confess so that the confession can be the punishment, and once you've been punished, you can start the long, comfortable business of being forgiven. You want me to give you a way out of this that has a floor to it, and I'm not going to, Ron. That's the only thing I came here to tell you. I'm not going to give you a punishment because a punishment ends and what you did doesn't get to end." Ron stared at him. He swallowed. That's worse than anything." "Yes," Harry said, "it is, I know. Hermione did the spell you never cast. I know that too, I felt it. A dozen wands and yours stayed down." Harry turned his face up to the same stars Ron had been staring at. "That's the thing you have to carry, and it's worse than the thing the others carry, and I'm going to tell you why, because no one else will, and you've earned the truth even if you've earned nothing else. The others all did something. Pike decided it. Croaker built it. Robards threw me. Hermione cut me down. They each did a thing, and a thing that's done can be confessed and accounted and in some long, terrible way set down. You didn't do anything. You stood there with your wand up and your arm shaking, and you watched, and you let it happen, and you couldn't make yourself stop it, and you couldn't make yourself help it. And that's the worst place a person can stand, Ron, right there in the middle doing nothing, because nothing can't be confessed. There's no speech for it. There's no resignation that covers it. You'll spend the rest of your life knowing you were the one person in that room who might have stopped it and didn't, not because you agreed, but because you froze, and freezing isn't a crime the law has a name for, so the law will never punish you for it, so you'll never be free of it. That's your reckoning, not the veil, the orchard. This one and every other one for the next 60 years. Ron was weeping now openly, the way Ginny had wept in the lane, the way the whole ruined family wept now, and Harry sat against the apple tree and let him, because there was nothing to be done about it, and the man was owed at least a witness. "You know what the worst of it is," Ron said when he could speak. "I'd do it again, not the freezing. I hate the freezing. But the rest, Harry, I stood in our tent in the war, and I felt what comes off you that night I came back. After the locket, after I left you, I came back and I found you, and you'd been alone in the dark with it, and the air in the tent was wrong. It was heavy, it was like standing next to a thing that's deciding whether to be a storm, and I never told you, because what do you say? You don't tell your best mate he feels like the sky before lightning. And it got worse every year. And when Hermione came to me with the numbers, I didn't even argue, because I'd felt it. I'd felt it with my own skin, and I was so tired of being afraid of the person I loved most." He pressed the bottle against his forehead. "That's the thing I can't say to anyone, that I was right to be afraid, that you do feel like that she wasn't mad. We weren't mad, Harry, that's what nobody understands. We weren't mad. We were just too small to be that scared and stay good." "No," Harry said quietly, "you weren't mad. That's the thing I came here understanding. None of you were mad. That's what makes it a tragedy instead of a crime." "What did you say to me?" Harry said when the worst of the weeping had passed. "At the end, you dropped your wand and you said 2 words and I couldn't hear them over the voices. I've spent 11 days not knowing. I think you owe me that. Before I go, what were they?" Ron went very still. "You don't remember," Harry said. "I remember." Ron's voice had gone to a whisper. "I remember every second of it. I'll remember it when I'm 100. I dropped my wand because I couldn't hold it anymore, and you were going through, and he pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth and took it away and said the 2 words into the dark of the orchard, the 2 words Harry had carried for 11 days, and they were the cruelest and most human 2 words Ron could possibly have said, and they explained the whole of him in a single stroke. "Come back," Ron said. "I said come back. I was helping them send you away forever, and I stood there and I said come back, because some part of me thought that if I wanted it hard enough, it might count for something." He broke off, shaking. "And then you did, you came back. I got the one thing I asked for, and it's a horror. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to any of us. And it's because of me, because I stood there and I couldn't choose. I couldn't even choose. I just wanted you gone so I'd stop being afraid, and I wanted you back so I'd stop being a monster, and I got both, and now this." He looked up at Harry with his whole destroyed face. "I'm sorry, God, Harry, I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't help. I know there's no undoing it. I'm sorry." Harry stood up. He looked down at the man who had been his brother in everything but blood, and the cold looked down with him. And for one moment the warm ache buried deep inside the cold rose up close to the surface, close enough that he almost let it move him, almost crossed the few feet between the trees and put his hand on Ron's shaking shoulder the way he would have once in another life when they were boys and the world was simple and the worst thing that could happen was a lost match or a bad mark. He did not. That was the discipline of the line he had to walk. To forgive Ron now in the orchard would be to give him the floor, the ending, the comfortable beginning of being forgiven. And Harry had decided, somewhere on the road back up out of death, that the one thing he would never again do was decide what was best for someone in a room they weren't allowed into, and the room Ron had to live in was his own. And Harry would not walk into it and rearrange the furniture, not even to be kind. I'm not going to tell you it's all right, Harry said. It isn't. And I'm not going to tell you I forgive you because you'd take it and use it to let yourself off, and you don't get to be let off, not by me, not yet, maybe not ever. But I'll tell you one thing, and it's the only gift I've got that won't rot in your hands. He looked down at Ron in the dark. You have a daughter coming, Rosie. Go and find Hermione wherever she's buried herself, and the two of you build that cot, and you raise that girl, and you raise her to be the kind of person who'd have stood on the dais and said no. That's it. That's the whole of your reckoning and your only way through it, not my forgiveness. Hers 18 years from now if you raise her right and tell her the truth and she decides, knowing all of it, that you were worth loving anyway. That's the verdict that matters, Ron, not mine. I'm going to be standing on a hill watching windows go dark for the next 10,000 years. You've got 18 years and one chance to be a man your daughter can forgive. Don't waste it sitting in an orchard wanting me to be your villain. And he walked out of the orchard and left Ron Weasley sitting against the apple tree under the gaps in the branches where the stars were. And behind him he heard, after a while, the sound of a grown man crying the way children cry, all the way down, and he made himself keep walking, because the cruelest mercy he had was to leave the man alone with the only sentence that could ever set him free. Hermione he found exactly where Luna had said she would be, which was in the Department of Mysteries, in a stone room he had never seen, at 3 in the morning, surrounded by the schematics of the thing she was building to put him outside the world. She had wards on the room. Good ones, the best the department had, layered and clever, and Harry walked through them the way he walked through everything now. And she did not startle when he appeared in the doorway, because she had been waiting for him longer than anyone, because she was the one who had always understood him best, and the one who had always been the most afraid, and those two things had never been separable in her. Not from the day she had first decided he was worth saving from a troll. You came to me last, Hermione said. She did not turn from the great table where the diagrams were spread, the impossible geometry of them glowing faintly in the lamplight, lines that hurt to follow, angles that did not add up the way angles should. I knew you would. You always save the hardest thing for last. It's the most predictable thing about you, and you've never once noticed it. She set down her quill. The hand that set it down was shaking, very slightly, with exhaustion or with something else. Ron, alive, Harry said. In the orchard at the Burrow, you should go to him. He needs you and you need him, and the two of you have a daughter to raise out of the wreck of this, and that matters more than anything you're building on that table, though I don't expect you to believe me. I can't go to him. She said it flatly, a stated fact like one of her numbers. Not yet, maybe not until it's done. I can't sit in a room with Ron and his guilt and build at the same time, and the building can't stop, so I had to choose, and I chose the building. You'd understand that if you were honest. You've always chosen the work over the people. It's the thing we have most in common and the thing neither of us will admit. She turned finally and looked at him, and her face was a wreck in a different way than Ron's, not swollen and drowned but hollowed, scraped down to the bone by weeks without sleep, and her eyes, when they found his, were terrible and clear. Go on then, do whatever it is you do to them, make me account. I've been waiting weeks for it. I've half wanted it just to have it over. I'm not going to make you account, Hermione. Why not? There was something almost like offense in it. You did it to Croaker. You made the most careful man in the country take himself apart in front of the Wisengamot. You made Robards confess and resign. I'm the one who cut you down. I did the severing charm. By any honest reckoning, I'm guiltier than Ron and crueler than Robards, because I'm the one who could have argued you out of all of it, and instead I argued them into it. So do it. Make me stand up in the open and say what I did. I'll say it. I'm not going to pretend I'm ashamed of the reasoning, because I'm not, and that should make it easy for you. And there it was, Harry thought. There was the thing that made Hermione different from all the rest of them, the thing that made her the one he had saved for last, and the one he could not simply forgive and could not simply hate. The others had all been ashamed. Pike under his coat of regret, Croaker eaten hollow by it, Robards walking his house at 3 in the morning, Ron drowning in an orchard. Every one of them had known underneath that they had done a monstrous thing, and the shame was the proof that some part of them had stayed human through it. Hermione was not ashamed. She had done the sums, and she stood by the sums, and she would defend the sums to his face in the lamplight at 3 in the morning, and that was either the most monstrous thing in the room or the most honest, and Harry had spent 11 days unable to decide which, and he understood now that he was not going to decide it tonight. No, Harry said, I'm not going to make you account, because you'd account gladly, and that would prove your point, not mine. You want to stand up in the open and explain the reasoning because you think if people just understood the reasoning they'd agree it had to be done. And the terrible thing, Hermione, the thing I came here to say to your face instead of in front of a crowd, is that you might be right. That's why I saved you for last, not because you hurt me most. Because you're the only one of them I can't be sure was wrong. She went still. Sit down, Harry said. I'm not going to do anything to you. I'm going to do the one thing nobody's done for you since the day you decided this, which is argue with you properly as an equal the way we used to before everyone got too afraid of me to disagree with me. Make your case, the real one, not the speech you gave on the dais, the one with the love in it to make it bearable. The cold one, the one you actually believe. I want to hear it, and I want to answer it, and at the end we'll both know whether you were right, and we'll have to live with the answer, both of us, you for 60 years and me forever. And Hermione Granger, who had been waiting weeks for someone to take her seriously, sat down across the glowing table from the man she had murdered and made her case. Power doesn't stay where you put it, she said. That's the whole of it, and everything else is detail. Every concentration of power in the history of the world, magical or muggle, has expanded to fill the space it's allowed, not because the people holding it were evil, but because power is a gradient and water runs downhill. You start with a man of perfect character and you give him strength no one can check, and for 10 years or 50 his character holds and everyone points at him and says, look, we were wrong to fear it. And then one day there's a crisis, a real one, children dying, a plague, a war, and the man with the unchecked power does the one thing his character has been straining against the whole time, which is to use it just this once for an obviously good end, and it works. And the next crisis comes and the bar is lower because last time it worked, and the time after that it's lower still. There's no moment of corruption, there's no villain's turn. There's just a gradient and water running down it, one reasonable step at a time, until one century you look up and the man of perfect character is a god who decides which children live, and every single step that brought him there was defensible and he'd make every one of them again. She leaned forward and her exhausted eyes burned. I didn't fear you, Harry. Fear is the word Luna uses and Ron uses, and it's wrong. I extrapolated you. I took the kindest, most careful, most self-denying man I have ever known, and I ran him forward 200 years with no checks and no death and infinite strength, and I did the sums honestly the way I do everything, and the man at the end of the sums was a tyrant. Not because you'd have failed, because no one could succeed. The position is the tyranny, the character is irrelevant. And I loved you too much to let the world find that out the slow way over 2 centuries, with no one able to stop it once it started. So I did the only thing a person who'd done those sums honestly could do. I tried to end it before it began, and I'd do it again. That's my case. Answer it. The lamplight glowed on the impossible diagrams between them. The cold sat in Harry's marrow and listened, because the cold he had learned was the part of him that found her case hardest to dismiss. You're right about the gradient, Harry said. That's the first thing I'll give you because it's true, and pretending it isn't would insult both of us. Power runs downhill, unchecked strength expands to fill its space. A man of perfect character, run forward 2 centuries with no death and no limit, probably does become the thing you're describing, one reasonable step at a time. I've felt the first step already. I made myself a vow in a wood 11 days ago about a specific way I refused to let myself slip, and the fact that I had to make the vow at all is proof you were seeing something real. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you the danger was imaginary. It wasn't. You saw it clearly. You may be the only person who saw it clearly. I'll carry that to the end of the world, that you were the one who loved me enough to see the worst of what I might become and clear-eyed enough to act on it. He set his hands flat on the table over the glowing lines. Here's where you were wrong, not in the sums, in the timing, and in the method, and in the one variable you left out because it was the one you couldn't bear to look at. Which variable? Hermione said. That the murder was the first step down the gradient, not the prevention of it. The first step. Harry held her eyes. You ran me forward 200 years and watched me become a tyrant by reasonable degrees, and you were so frightened of the man at the end of those sums that you didn't notice you'd just become him. That's what the dais was, Hermione. A small group of clever, well-meaning people, certain they were preventing a catastrophe, deciding in a closed room that the rules didn't apply to them this once, that they had the right to end a life without trial because the stakes were too high for the ordinary checks. That's not the thing that stops a tyrant. That's the seed a tyrant grows from. You didn't prevent the unchecked use of power for a greater good. You did it. You were the first crisis. You were the children dying and the plague and the war, the obviously good end that justified the once only exception, and it worked, the way it always works the first time. And if I hadn't come back, you'd be standing exactly where you're standing now, building the next exception and the next, each one defensible, each bar lower than the last, until 1 century you'd look up. He let it land. You ran the sums on me and missed that they were a mirror. The tyrant at the end of your 200 years wasn't me. It was whoever felt justified enough to start making exceptions to keep me from becoming him, and you volunteered. Hermione's face had gone white. And here's the rest of it, Harry said, quieter now, the variable you left out. You ran me forward with infinite power and no death, and you got a tyrant, and you were right, that man is monstrous, but you ran the wrong man. You ran a Harry who had everything taken from him and nothing left to lose, and no one left who'd loved him without fearing him. You ran the Harry your own actions would create. You never ran the other one. You never ran the Harry who comes back from the dead with the power to burn the world that murdered him and goes to an orchard and sits with the man who let it happen and tells him to go home and raise his daughter. You never ran the Harry who stands in front of the woman who cut him down and instead of unmaking her, argues with her as an equal at 3 in the morning because he'd rather be right than safe. That Harry exists. He's standing in front of you. He's 11 days into infinite power and a murdered life, and the worst thing he's done is make some frightened officials tell the truth. Your sums said that man was impossible. He's the one variable you couldn't run, because to run him you'd have had to believe that a person could hold that much and not let it wear him down to the power. And if you'd believed that, even for a moment, you couldn't have done the sums that put me through the veil, so you left him out. You left out the only version of me that mattered, because including him would have stopped you and you'd already decided not to be stopped. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the impossible diagrams. It might still wear me down, Harry said. I want to be honest because you've been honest and you've earned honesty more than anyone. You may be right yet. In 100 years, in 1,000, the gradient may take me the way you said, and the worst of me may be the last word after all, and on that day you'll have been right, and it won't matter because you'll be 60 years dead, and so will everyone who could have stopped it. I can't prove you wrong about the end. No one can prove anyone wrong about a thing 200 years out. All I can do is be today the man your sum said was impossible, and be him again tomorrow and the day after for as long as I can, and hope that a man who chooses the warm direction every single day for 10,000 days running is a different thing than your gradient allows for. That's not an argument, it's a wager. It's the only wager left on the table, and I'm the only one who can place it, and you tried to take it off the table before a single chip was down because you were too frightened of losing to let it be played. He straightened. That's my answer. You were right about everything except the one thing that mattered, which is that the cure you chose was the disease, and the worst part, the part I think you already know, is that you're going to finish building this. He nodded at the glowing diagrams. Aren't you? Hermione looked at the table for a long moment. When she looked up, there were tears on her face, the first he had seen from her since the dais, and her voice was steady through them, which was the most terrible thing about her, the same steadiness that had condemned him. Yes, she said, I am, because even if you're right, even if every word you just said is true, I can't bet the world on it. You're asking me to wager the next 1,000 years on the hope that one man chooses the warm direction 10,000 days running. That's not a wager a responsible person makes, that's a wager a person in love makes. And I was in love with you, Harry, I was, in the way you love a brother, and it didn't change the sums, and it doesn't change them now. She put her shaking hand flat on the diagrams. It's nearly done, the Confederation has it. The veil can't take you, but there are older things than the veil, and you can be put outside the world where you can't be reached and can't reach back, and you'll be alive, you'll always be alive, but you'll be somewhere the gradient has no downhill to run. I'm sorry. I'm not ashamed of it, and I'm sorry, and I've finally learned those two things can be true at once, and you're the one who taught me 11 days ago by coming back and being kind. It would have been so much easier if you'd come back a monster. You'd think you'd have the decency. You understand what you're describing, Harry said. Not a prison, a grave for a man who can't die. You're going to put me in a place outside everything alone, forever awake, with no door in it and no window and no end, and you're going to call it containment because the word grave would keep you up at night and you don't sleep as it is. He watched her flinch and did not soften it. I'm not saying it to wound you. I'm saying it because you, of all people, deserve to know exactly what you're building in the plainest words with no kindness on them. You're not preventing an eternity of tyranny. You're guaranteeing an eternity of solitary confinement for the only person who ever helped you save the world. Do the sums on that, Hermione. Do them honestly the way you do everything. And if you can still finish it after, then finish it, and we'll both know what you are, and so will you, which is the part you'll have to live with and I won't. I've done those sums, Hermione said, and her voice did not break, and that was the most terrible thing of all. I did them the first week. I know exactly what I'm building. I've known since the start. And I'm going to finish it anyway, because a guaranteed eternity of solitude for one is a smaller horror than a possible eternity of tyranny for everyone, and I'm the only one willing to hold both numbers in my head at once and choose. That's what you never understood about me, Harry. You think I left out the kind variable. I didn't, I put it in. I ran the Harry who comes back kind and goes to the orchard and argues at 3 in the morning, and I wept doing it, and the sum still came out the same because kindness today doesn't survive 10,000 days of being the only thing standing between the world and its end. I ran your best self loses too, that's why I can't stop. She turned back to the diagrams and picked up her quill, and her hand was steady now. When, he had asked, and she answered the question he had not finished. Days, go and say your goodbyes, it's the last kindness I have, and you taught me it's real even when you're not ashamed of the thing it sits beside. Use the days, please. Harry stood across the glowing table from the woman who had murdered him and was about to do it again more permanently with the whole world behind her this time, and he found, examining himself, that the thing he felt was not the cold clarity he had felt with Ron. It was older and worse, and he let himself name it, the one named thing he would permit himself in all of this because she had earned the truth and so had he. It was grief. The same grief exactly that he had felt in the rain on the first night, the grief of the door that would not open. Because Hermione was the door now, the last one, and she was right that he could not be too big for a door, and somewhere under all the cold and all the power and all the terrible patience, the part of Harry Potter that was still a boy who had loved a bossy, clever girl on a train at 11 years old, understood that the person he loved most in the world after the dead was going to spend the last of her sleepless life building the thing that would take him away from everything. And that she was going to do it out of love, and that there was no version of any of it where they both got to be right. All right, Harry said, the way he had said it in the rain to the empty street. All right, go to Ron, Hermione, tonight, build the cot before you build the door, promise me that much, raise your daughter. Some of this has to be worth something, and it isn't going to be the door, so let it be her. And he left her there in the stone room with the glowing diagrams, the last page of his ledger written and unbalanced because there had never been a way to balance this one, and he went up out of the Department of Mysteries into the gray before dawn to spend the days he had left being as hard as he could for as long as he could the man her sums had said was impossible. Luna was on the stile when he came up the hill, as though she had known the night he'd had, and perhaps she had. You've had the conversation, she said. I can tell you look like a man who's been proved half right, which is the worst thing to be because you can't even enjoy the half. She patted the rail beside her, and Harry sat, and the valley lay gray below them with one window lit far off that he would not let himself look at directly. They're coming for you properly this time, the whole world. Days, Harry said. She told me herself there's a working, not a cage. A door to somewhere outside everything where I can't be reached and can't reach back. Forever, he looked at his hands. She's right that I can't be too big for a door. I'm the last person who'd argue that with her. Luna was quiet a while. Then she reached over and put her cold, small hand flat on his chest, over the place where the storm was, the way she had on the first night, and she pressed, and she was checking, the way she had made him promise she could, and Harry sat still under her hand and let her find out whether there was anything left in him but the lake. Still there, she said softly, and her relief was a real thing in the dark, and she took her hand away. Good, you kept it. 11 days of being murdered and worshipped and feared and put on trial in your own court, and you kept it. I want you to remember that, where you're going. That on the night before the world came for you, a strange girl put her hand on your chest and found the warm thing still there. Some people go their whole lives and nobody checks. You should feel lucky in a way. You won't, but you should. I'm going to outlive this, Harry said. The door, the working, all of it. If they put me outside the world, I'll be awake in the dark forever, and I'll never get to check the one thing you taught me to check. And one day, even if I keep it, there'll be no one left who'd know how to find it. He turned to her. You're going to grow old, Luna. You're going to have a whole life, magizoology and odd theories and children who believe in snorkax. And you're going to grow old and walk through the door, and I'm going to be in the dark outside the world the entire time, and I won't even get to grieve you properly, because grief needs a place and I won't have one. Then don't go in the dark believing the wrong thing, Luna said, and she took his face in both her cold hands and made him look at her, and her pale eyes were the steadiest thing in the whole gray valley. Listen to me, because I'm only going to be here to say it for a little while in the long arithmetic of you. They haven't put you in the dark yet, you have days. And there is one window in this valley you've watched go dark 100 times and never once walked up to, and the only reason you stayed away was to keep them safe. And if the world is about to put you outside it forever, then staying away doesn't keep anyone safe anymore. It just means the last thing you do as a man in the world is the thing you've denied yourself the whole time. Don't do that, Harry, whatever else. Don't let the last of your freedom be a hedge on a hill. She let go of his face. Go and hold your godson once before the door. Let him be right that you came back. You're allowed one human thing before they take the world away. Take it, take the boy. Harry looked down the valley at the one lit window, and for the first time he let himself look at it directly, and the warm ache buried deep inside the cold rose up so close to the surface that it was nearly the surface. And he did not answer Luna, because there was no answer that was not a yes, and they both knew it. And some yesies are too large to be said out loud and have to be left to be done. Far above all of them, in a high office where the lamps burned all night now, Eldon Pike read the latest cable from the International Confederation of Wizards and allowed himself, for the first time since a dead man had walked into his court, the thin private smile of a man who has found, at the bottom of his options, the one card he had not known he held. He could not kill Harry Potter, he could not cage him. He had learned both lessons in front of 300 witnesses, and they had cost him his head of Auror and very nearly his government. But he did not need to kill him or cage him. He needed only to make him the world's problem instead of Britain's, and the Confederation, frightened by the court and the broken binding and the question that no one could answer, had agreed at last to make him exactly that. Every nation, every working. The oldest doors in the world opened all at once in one place, with the whole of magical humanity standing behind them to push. Pike folded the cable and put it in the locked drawer with the others, and he looked out his high window at the lights of the sleeping city, and he thought about the speech he would give when it was done, the grave, careful speech about a terrible necessity and a danger contained in a world made safe, and he practiced very quietly in the empty office the exact expression of regret he would wear while he gave it. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Containment. He went to the cottage in the daylight, which he had never once done, and he walked down the rise and across the wet garden and up to the door he had told himself for 11 days he could not open, and he lifted the latch and he went in. Andromeda was at the stove. She turned at the sound of the latch, and she had a wand in her apron pocket and a long wooden spoon in her hand, and she looked at the dead man standing in her kitchen doorway with the morning behind him, and she did not scream and she did not raise the wand. She set the spoon down on the rest beside the stove, carefully, the way you set down a thing when your hands have decided to be steady on their own, and she looked at him for a long moment with the face that had buried a husband and a daughter and a son-in-law inside a single year, the face of a woman who had run out of new ways to be afraid a long time ago. I knew it was you on the rise, she said. That morning, I felt you the way you feel someone looking. I told myself it was grief. Grief makes you feel watched. Her voice was level and her eyes were not. You let me think you were dead, Harry. There's a child in this house who cried himself sick for a man who was standing in my hedge. I ought to take this spoon to you. I ought to do worse. She did not move toward the spoon. Why now, after all this time of watching the window? Why come in now? Because I'm out of time, Harry said. The world's coming for me. There's a working, a real one, the whole Confederation behind it, and when it's done I won't be anywhere a person can reach. Days, maybe less. And a friend told me that the only reason I stayed away from this house was to keep him safe, and that if they're going to put me outside the world anyway, then staying away doesn't keep anyone safe. It just means I let them take the one thing I wanted before I had it even once. He stood in the doorway and did not come further in because the cold came with him and he would not bring it to her stove uninvited. I came to hold him, Andromeda, once, before the door, if you'll let me, and if you won't, I'll understand it and I'll go back to the rise and that'll be the last of it and I won't trouble you again. Andromeda Tonks looked at him across her warm kitchen, the steam rising off the pot, the rain on the window, the whole small, ordinary morning of a house that had decided to keep living after the war took everything that made it whole, and whatever she saw in his face was enough because her own face came apart just slightly at one corner the way a wall comes apart at one stone. He's in the front room, she said. He's been building a castle out of the good cushions and he'll want you to knock it down because that's the part he likes. Go on. She picked the spoon back up and turned back to the stove, and Harry understood that she had turned away so that he would not have to be looked at while he went, and that it was the kindest thing anyone had done for him since the cloth touched his face from the inside. Harry, when you've held him. You'll have to do the hard thing and I won't help you do it because I can't, but I'll tell you what it is so you don't dodge it. You'll have to let him think you're going away on a journey, not dying. Children can't hold dying, a journey, a long one, and you'll have to mean it kindly so that when he's grown and he learns the truth, he'll remember a man who came and held him and went on a journey and not a ghost who haunted a hedge. Give him the journey. It's the last thing you can give him, and it's the only one that lasts. Teddy was 4 years old and had his father's gentleness and his mother's restless hair, which at the moment was the deep blue of the cushioned castle he was defending. And when Harry came into the front room and knelt down on the rug, the boy looked up at him with no fear at all, none, the pure, clear, unafraid recognition of a child who had been told a man was gone and had never once believed it, and he said, "You came back." With the tremendous satisfaction of the very young at being proved right against the whole foolish certainty of adults, and he climbed into Harry's lap with no time passed between them at all, with no cold between them, the dead man kneeling on the rug, simply Harry who had been away and was back the way Harry had always come back. And Harry held his godson. He had braced for the cold to frighten the boy, the way it frightened everything now, the way it had made the horrors back away and the binding break and a woman drop ajar in Diagon Alley. It did not. Teddy burrowed into him and was warm against the cold and did not seem to feel it, or felt it and did not care, the way the very young do not care about the things that terrify the grown. And Harry sat on the rug with the small warm weight of him and the restless blue hair under his chin. And the warm ache that lived buried deep inside the cold came all the way up to the surface at last, all the way. And for the length of 1 hour on a rainy morning, Harry Potter was not a force of magic, or a dead man walking, or the question no one could answer. He was a godfather knocking down a cushioned castle so that a 4-year-old could shriek and build it again, over and over, the most pointless and most necessary game in the world. And he played it as though there were nothing else, because for that hour there was nothing else, because Luna had been right, as Luna was always right, that he was allowed one human thing before they took the world away. And this was it, this was the whole of it. This small warm weight and this blue hair and this castle that fell and rose and fell. He told the boy things in the hour in between the falling of the castle. He told him about his father, who had been a man other men followed into the dark because he made the dark seem survivable. He told him about his mother, who had loved so loudly and laughed so easily that a whole frightened resistance had warmed its hands at her. He gave the boy the parents the boy would never remember in small pieces wrapped in a game, so that somewhere underneath the play they would lodge and stay, and one day, grown, Teddy would find he knew things about Remus and Tonks that no one had told him, and would never quite work out where the knowing came from, and that too was a thing Harry could give that would last. From the kitchen doorway once he felt Andromeda watching them, and he did not look up and she did not come in, and after a moment she went back to the stove, because there are things a person needs to see and cannot bear to be seen seeing, and a kindness can run in both directions through a doorway at once. When the hour was over, because all hours are over, Harry held the boy a little apart and looked at him, and did the hard thing Andromeda had named. "I have to go on a journey, Ted," he said. "A long one, longer than any I've been on, and I don't know when I'll be back, and I need you to be very brave about it, braver than you've ever been, and I need you to do something for me while I'm gone. Can you do something for me?" Teddy nodded, solemn, his hair going from blue to serious brown. "I need you to grow up," Harry said. "That's the job, that's the whole job. You grow up and you learn to fly and you go to Hogwarts and you make trouble, the good kind, and you grow up into the sort of man your dad was, who was the gentlest, brave man I ever knew, and your mum, who could change her face to make a sad person laugh and never once used it to be anything but kind. You do that, you grow up good. And every birthday on your birthday you say my name once, just once out loud, so I'll know you remembered wherever the journey's taken me. Will you do that? Every birthday, just my name." "Harry," Teddy said, practicing, and his hair went gold. "That's it," Harry said. His voice did not break. He was proud of that later across all the years, the same way he had been proud on the dais that at the only goodbye that mattered his voice came out level. "That's exactly it. Every year I'll be listening." He kissed the top of the boy's head where the gold hair was, and he stood, and he carried him through to the kitchen and set him in the high chair, and Andromeda did not turn from the stove, and her shoulders were very straight, and Harry went to the door and stopped with his hand on the latch. "Thank you," he said to her straight back, "for the hour. I won't be able to repay it. I won't be anywhere I can repay anything. But I wanted you to know I know what it cost you to give it." "Go on," Andromeda said to the pot in a voice that held by a thread. Go and meet your world, Harry, and whatever it does to you, you remember that on the last morning you were free, a boy with his father's eyes climbed into your lap and called you back from the dead because he never once believed you'd left him. Hold that against the dark. It's bigger than it looks. And she did not turn, and he did not make her. And he lifted the latch and went out into the rain to meet the working that the whole world had built to make him nothing. They had raised it on the chalk downs of Wessex, at a ring of standing stones older than the Romans, older than the wizards who had carved the first runes into them, a place where the membrane between the living world and the country of the dead had always been thin, and where now the gathered wool of magical humanity had come to make it thinner still on purpose for him. Harry came to it on foot in the last light across the open down, and he stopped on the rise above the ring and looked at what the world had built to be rid of him. It was beautiful in the way that only the truly enormous is beautiful, the way a storm front is beautiful from the one safe mile. The ring of gray stone stood as it had stood for 5,000 years, and within it and around it the Confederation had raised a thing that the eye could not entirely hold. There were circles inside the circle, rings of fire that did not burn and rings of light that did not shine so much as deepen. And at the cardinal points stood the delegations of the nations, hundreds of wizards in the robes of every magical tradition on earth, the curse weavers of the Sahara with their faces veiled in indigo, the storm callers of the cold north, the quiet patient wand makers of the east, the Americans ranked in their gray field robes. The old families of Europe in colors that had not been worn in war for 300 years, ranked and waiting, all of them, the whole of magical humanity gathered on one English down to push one man out of the world. Above them the working hummed at a pitch below hearing that Harry felt in the marrow where the cold lived, a sound like the one the suppression ring had made, except that this was the suppression ring of the entire species, 10,000 times over, tuned, patient, vast. And at the center, where the oldest stone leaned, they had brought the veil itself, torn from its arch under London and rehung between two of the standing stones, the tattered gray swaying in its wind from nowhere, the one door that opened one way set now into a ring of older doors, so that all of them might be opened at once in one place with the whole of magical humanity standing behind them to push. He understood the design the moment he saw it, because he understood doors now better than anyone who had ever lived. They could not be too big for him, nothing could, but they were not trying to be a cage that held him. They were trying to be a current strong enough to move him, the way the river beyond the veil had moved him, except that this time there were 1,000 wizards in the doors of every nation lending their weight to the push, and the place itself was a thin place, and the math of it, Hermione's math, was that if you opened enough doors at once in a place where the wall was already thin and put the gathered will of the entire magical world behind them, you could move even a thing that no single door could hold. Not kill him, move him outside, to the place the doors led that was not the country of the dead and was not the world, the cold between, where a thing could be set down and never reached back awake forever. He could have refused to come, he knew that. They could not have made him, there was no compulsion on earth that ran in his blood anymore. But he had decided on the road back up out of death that he would never again let a thing be done to him in a room he was not allowed into. And so he had come to the room, the largest room anyone had ever built, the open down under the dying light with the whole world standing in it, and he walked down off the rise and into the ring of stones alone on his own feet to meet the working in the open, the way he had met everything since the cloth touched his face from the inside. The ranked wizards of the nations saw him come, and a sound went through them, not a word, the sound a vast crowd makes when the thing it is gathered for and dreaded becomes real and walks toward it. And at the center of the ring, where the rehung veil swayed, a small group stood that Harry knew. Pike in his minister's robes, with the careful regret arranged on his face for the cameras of history. The supreme mugwump of the Confederation, an ancient witch with eyes like cold coins. Croaker, drawn and gray, who had not wanted to come, and had been brought because the working needed the man who understood the veil. And Hermione, at the heart of it all, at the great central instrument of her own design, exhausted past exhaustion, her hands on the controls of the thing she had built to bury him outside the world. And she looked up as he entered the ring and met his eyes across the rings of fire that did not burn, and she did not look away, and that was her last cruelty and her last courage, that she made herself watch him walk in. "You came," she said, her voice carried across the silent down. "I didn't think you would, I thought you'd make us hunt you. It would have been easier on me if you'd made us hunt you." "You told me to say my goodbyes," Harry said. "I've said them. I held my godson this morning and told him I was going on a journey, so you can be easy about that part, Hermione. I'm not going to fight you in front of the world and bring down the down around all these people the way the Aurors brought down the oak. I'm going to stand in the middle of your working in the open and let you push, and let the whole world watch what happens, the same as I let the binding break in the court, because they need to see it. Every nation on earth needs to see it with their own eyes, so that no one ever has to do this again, so that no child 1,000 years from now grows up being told there was a way and it was tried and it nearly worked. Let them see that it didn't. Open your doors, I'm here, push." And the supreme mugwump raised her ancient hand and brought it down, and the whole world pushed. There is no proper account of what happened on the down at Wessex that evening, because no two of the 1,000 who stood in the ring remembered it the same way, and the instruments that were meant to record it came back afterward with readings that the department spent years refusing to publish. But it went in its essentials like this. The doors opened. All of them at once, every ancient working the nations had brought. The rings of fire and the rings of deepening light, and at the heart of them the veil itself, the one door that took everything, and the gathered will of magical humanity came down behind them like a tide coming in. A current of pure intention strong enough to move mountains, strong enough, Hermione's math had promised, to move even a thing no single door could hold. And it found Harry Potter standing quiet in the center of the ring with his hands open at his sides, and it reached for him and it pushed. He felt it as a pressure on every door of himself at once, the whole species leaning its weight on him, and for one moment, the first moment of true effort he had known since he came back up the road, he felt himself begin to move. That was the part Hermione's math had got right and the part Harry never told anyone. That for one moment on the chalk down with the whole world pushing, he had felt the current take him, felt the floor of the world begin to slide away beneath him toward the cold between, and had understood that they had very nearly found the one push that could. The horizon tilted, the stones blurred. The cold between reached up around his ankles like a tide, and the gold country and the green world and the chalk underfoot all began to lean together toward a single point that was not anywhere, and Harry, for the length of one breath, was almost gone. And then the doors reached deeper for the part of him that could truly be moved, the part that could be carried on a current the way the river had carried him, and they found it already gone. He had been carried down that current once, all the way to the bottom of the one road that has no turning, and he had been spat back up. It changed, and a thing that has been all the way to the bottom of the current and refused by the current itself is not a thing the current can take again. He was not too big for the doors. He was the wrong shape for them entirely. He was the one being in all the world that the country of the dead had already reached for and let go, and there is no second push for a thing that the first and oldest push could not keep. The current of the whole world's will came down on Harry and broke. It broke the way the binding had broken, the way the lattice had broken, the way every door they had ever closed on him had broken, except that this was every door at once, and the breaking was vast, was cosmic, was a thing that lit the chalk down white to the horizon and was seen, it was said, from the coast of France. The gathered intention of 1,000 wizards, lent to a working that could move mountains, poured into the place where Harry stood and found nothing to move and had to go somewhere and went, the way it always went, into him, through him, out of him, and with it went the last and largest measure of whatever in him could still have been moved, could still have been ended, could still have been called mortal by even the most generous accounting, burned away on the current, given up to the cold. And what was left when the white light died was not less than Harry Potter had been when he walked into the ring. It was so much more that the 1,000 wizards of the nations fell to their knees on the chalk. All of them, every tradition on earth, not in worship and not in defeat, but in the simple animal recognition of a thing that the human frame is not built to stand upright in front of, and the rings of fire that did not burn went out, and the rings of deepening light collapsed. And the delegations of the nations knelt on the down in the failing light before the dead man standing quiet in the center of the broken working, and understood, all of them together in one breath, across every language and every border, the thing that Croker had measured and the court had seen and the forest of Dean had learned, that there was nothing to be done, that there had never been anything to be done. That they had brought the gathered strength of the entire world to a thin place and opened every door at once and put their whole will behind the push, and they had moved him not 1 inch, and they had made him instead into the largest thing that had ever stood under the open sky. And in the breaking, for one moment, the veil at the center swung wide. It was not meant to. The veil was the load-bearing door, the one all the others were hung around, and when the working broke against Harry, the backlash tore through it, and for one moment the tattered gray blue opened like a curtain in a gale. And behind it, through it, Harry saw the country of gold lights, closer than he had been to it since the road, his mother at the front of all of them with her hands at her sides, his father serious with his hand half raised, the whole gold shore of the dead one moment's walk away through a door blown wide. And the warm ache that lived buried in the cold rose up and reached with everything in him, because the door was open at last, and all he had to do was step. And the wall that was new and the wall that was him would not let him through, because the door was open to everyone in the world except its master, and 1,000 kneeling wizards watched the dead man take one step toward the blown wide veil and stop, as though he had walked into glass. His hand outstretched toward something none of them could see, and they watched his face in that moment, the only moment in the whole long night that his face was not level, and not one of them ever spoke of what was on it, because there are some things a person sees once and carries to their own grave unsaid out of mercy for the thing they saw. Then the veil fell shut, and the gold country was gone, and the door that opened one way for everyone but him swung closed, and Harry Potter stood alone in the center of the world's broken working, with his hand still half raised toward the place where his mother had been, and lowered it. That was the cost paid in front of the whole world, not the working, the glimpse. They had built the largest thing in history to put him outside the world forever, and the only wound it had managed to deal him was to show him, for one moment, the door he could not pass open with everyone he had ever loved standing one step beyond it, and then to shut it in his face while 1,000 strangers knelt and watched him reach. He stood in the broken ring with his hand lowered and understood, in a way he had not let himself understand before, what the rest of it would be. Not this. Not the spectacle of the largest weapon in history coming apart on him, not the kneeling nations, not the cameras of history. The rest of it would be quieter than any of that. It would be 1,000 evenings on 1,000 rises, watching windows he was not allowed to enter. It would be the slow procession of every face he had ever loved toward the one door he could not follow them through. The working had failed, and the failing had shown the whole world that he could not be moved, and the only thing it had truly moved was him, 1 inch, toward the understanding that being impossible to remove from the world was its own kind of removal, that a man the world cannot put outside it is a man the world will never again be able to let all the way back in. They had not exiled him. They had not needed to. He had been exiled the moment the cloth touched his face from the inside, and every working they raised against him after was only the world confirming in its loudest possible voice the thing he already carried in the cold of his marrow, that there was a place set for everyone but him, and that it would stay set and stay empty, world without end. And here on the broken down in the failing light with the whole world on its knees in front of him, Harry Potter came to the place Hermione's sums had always pointed at, the place she had run 100 times and wept over, and stood in it and found that it was real and that it was his, and that the next thing he did would answer her question for all the centuries to come. Because they were on their knees, every one of them. The supreme mugwump of the Confederation, an ancient witch who had never knelt to anything, knelt on the chalk with her cold coin eyes turned up to him. The delegations of the nations, the curse-weavers and the storm-callers and the old families of Europe, all of them down, all of them undone, every working they had ever devised spent and broken at his feet. Pike was on his knees at the central instrument with his regret torn off and his terror bare. And Harry stood in the center of it, the largest thing that had ever stood under the sky, with the whole gathered power of magical humanity exhausted on the ground around him, and he understood that there was nothing in that moment that he could not do. He could end them. He could end all of them, the entire ruling power of the wizarding world in the space between one breath and the next, and there would be no one left who had ever feared him and no one left who could ever try this again, and he could build on the bear down whatever world he chose, and the survivors would call it mercy and mean it, because the alternative he had just shown them was the end of everything. This was the gradient. This was the obviously good end that justified the once only exception, the first reasonable step down the long slope to the man at the bottom of Hermione's sums. In the people who would never stop trying to end you, who could argue with it, they had murdered him. They had built the largest weapon in history to bury him alive forever. They were on their knees, and they would do it again the moment they could stand. The cold in his marrow, the part of him that no longer minded heat or pain or the dying of 200-year-old oaks, did the arithmetic in an instant and returned the answer that arithmetic always returned, which was that the safe thing and the easy thing and the defensible thing were all the same thing. And it was to never have to walk into a room he wasn't allowed into again, because there would be no rooms, because there would be no one left to hold the votes. He stood on the down with the whole world kneeling and the cold offering him the world, and he thought of a 4-year-old in a high chair practicing his name. He thought of a strange girl pressing her cold hand to his chest and telling him to keep the warm thing there. He thought of his mother shaking her head across a gray river, "You can't bring it through this door and you won't leave it behind." And he thought of the vow he had made in a wood, the one he had no way to keep and had made anyway, that whatever else the centuries did to him, there was one subtraction he would not allow, one direction he would refuse to forget was warm. "No," Harry said to the cold out loud the way he had said it in the wood so that he would have to hear himself say it. "Not that, whatever else, not that." And then he raised his head and spoke to the kneeling world in a voice that did not need to be raised, because the down had gone so silent that the wind in the stones carried it to the farthest delegation. "Stand up," Harry said. "All of you, stand up and look at me, because I want you to remember this part most of all. You brought the whole world here to put me outside it, and you failed, and now I'm standing over you and there's nothing any of you can do, and I want every nation on this hill to carry home what I do next." He waited until the first of them, ashamed, had climbed to their feet, and then the rest, the whole kneeling thousand rising slowly under his eyes. "I could rule you, you know I could. I could end the ones who did this and take the rest and remake the world into whatever shape I chose, and you'd thank me for it, because I've just shown you the only thing worse. That's the world you were afraid of, that's the man your sums predicted, he's available, he's standing right here, and all he has to do is reach." He let the silence hold. "And I'm telling you in front of all of you that I decline, not because I can't, because I won't. Write that down, carry it to every nation. The thing you could not kill or cage or move had the whole world at its feet and chose to do nothing with it at all. And if 1,000 years from now you find you need to be afraid of me, let it be of that, and not of a story you told to make the murder easier." It was, the histories would later agree, the most important sentence anyone spoke on the down at Wessex, and it was spoken to 1,000 people who had come to bury him, and it was true, and Hermione Granger heard it from the central instrument with the chalk gray light on her face, and understood finally all the way down that she had built the largest weapon in the history of the world to stop a thing that had just declined in front of every witness on earth to be the thing she feared. And that her sums had been answered at the last by a variable she had not been brave enough to run. And one of them, at the central instrument, with his regret torn off and the easy mercy of Harry's restraint laid bare in front of him, understood that he was looking at a thing he could neither kill nor cage, nor even provoke into the monster that would have justified him, and broke. Harry felt it begin before he saw it, a wrongness in the broken working, a pressure where there should have been only the slack of a spent spell. He turned. At the center instrument where Hermione had stood, Pike had taken the controls, and Croaker was at his shoulder with his face the color of the chalk, saying, "No, Minister, no, not that. You don't understand what that does," and Pike was not listening. Pike had the look of a man who has decided that if he cannot have the world he wanted, he will not leave the world he has, and his hands moved on the great instrument, and did the thing Croaker was begging him not to do. He forced it. The working was built to open every door at once and push. It had pushed and broken, and Pike, with the cold logic of a man at the end of everything, reasoned that if the doors could not move Harry, and if Harry would not even have the decency to become the tyrant that would prove the whole thing right, then the doors themselves, opened past all safety, forced past the point where any sane working stopped, might do to the whole thin place what the veil had been built to do to one man. If he could not put Harry outside the world, he would tear the wall between the worlds open at the thinnest place on earth here now, with 1,000 wizards kneeling on it, and let the country of the dead pour through into the country of the living. And let Harry Potter, the great cause of it all, stand in the middle of an unmaking he could not stop, and answer to history for that. "If we cannot be rid of you," Pike said, and his voice carried across the down, high and cracked and final, the careful regret gone at last, nothing under it now but the naked thing it had always covered, "then let the world see what you cost us. Let them see the dead come back because of you. Let them see what we were trying to spare them when there's no sparing it anymore. Eldon, don't." That was Hermione, on her feet now, lunging for the instrument, and Croaker had both hands on Pike's arm, and it was not enough, because a man who has decided to end the world is the hardest thing on earth to stop with 2 hands in a sentence. And Pike brought his hands down on the force controls, and at the center of the ring of stones where the veil hung, the thin place tore. It did not tear like cloth. It tore like the surface of a deep lake torn from below, a wound opening in the air between the 2 oldest stones. And through it came the cold, not Harry's cold, the other cold, the bottomless cold of the country on the far side, pouring out into the world through a hole that Pike had ripped in the wall. And the gold lights behind the veil were not gold anymore, were guttering, were being pulled toward the wound the way water is pulled toward a broken dam. And the 1,000 wizards scrambled up and back in terror as the wound widened, and the down itself began to go gray at the edges of it, the grass and the chalk and the air losing their hold on being the things they were, the way the iron frame had lost its hold in the wood, except that this was the world, this was the wall of the world, and it was coming open. Hermione reached the instrument and threw everything she had against it. Every line of her own design turned now to closing what Pike had forced open. And the wound did not so much as slow, because the working had been built to be irreversible. That had been the whole point of it. You do not build a thing to put a man outside the world forever and then leave a way to undo it, and she had been too thorough. The way she was always too thorough. And now her thoroughness was tearing the world open, and there was no line in all her glowing diagrams that would close it again. She turned from the instrument with the chalk-gray light of the wound on her exhausted face, and she looked across the broken ring at Harry. And for the first time since the dais, there was no certainty in her at all, only the bare terror of a person who has finally found the variable she left out, and it was that some doors once forced can only be closed from the inside. There was, in all the terrified 1,000 and all the gathered workings of all the nations, exactly one being on the chalk down that evening who could stand in a tier between the living and the dead, and not be unmade by it. Harry turned from the place where his mother had been and looked at the widening wound in the world, and understood with the cold, complete clarity he understood everything now, that the thing the whole world had built to be rid of him had just become the only thing that could end the world, and that he was the only thing that could close it, and that to close it he would have to walk back into the one place he had sworn he would never go again, the road that had no turning, the cold with no door in it. And stand in the doorway he was locked out of and hold it shut with what remained of himself, and that the night was not over, and the worst of it, the very worst, the thing the whole long road had been bending toward since an owl came down his chimney, was still to come. He looked once across the tearing light at Hermione, who had built the door and could not close it, and once at Pike, who had torn the world rather than be proved merciful, and once last at the wound itself widening between the 2 oldest stones, the bottomless cold pouring out of it into the country of the living, the gold shore of the dead guttering as it was dragged toward the breach. And he did the arithmetic one final time, the way he did everything, swift and complete, and there was only one answer in it, and it was the answer he had sworn in a wood he would never give. To close a door that opens only from the inside, someone has to be on the inside. Harry Potter turned his back on the kneeling world and the woman who had murdered him and the man who had ended it, and he walked on his own feet, the way he had walked into every worst thing since an owl came down his chimney, toward the tear in the wall of the world, and into the cold he had sworn never to enter again. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The force the world could not contain, the wound did not want him, which was the first surprise and the last one he would ever have. Everything else in his existence had reached for him and been refused. The veil had refused to keep him. The curses had refused to land. The bindings had refused to hold, and the world's whole gathered will had refused to move him, and through all of it Harry had been the still point, the thing that nothing could touch. But the tear in the wall of the world was not a thing reaching for him. It was a thing coming apart, and a thing coming apart does not refuse, it only widens. And as Harry walked into it, the bottomless cold of the far country came around him not as an attack but as a flood. And for the first time since the day as he walked into a force that was not interested in him at all, that would unmake the chalk and the stones and the kneeling nations and the cottage with the lit window and the boy practicing his name, not out of malice, not out of fear, but with the vast indifference of water finding the crack in a dam, and that indifference was the only thing left in any world that Harry Potter had cause to fear, because it was the one thing he could not simply outlast. The world could outlast him, that was the trouble. The world could end while he stood in it, and he would go on standing alone in the cold forever in the wreck of everything he had walked in to save. So he did not stop at the threshold, he went in. The chalk down fell away behind him, the stones and the light and the screaming, and the road took him. The road that had no turning, except that now it had one because he was the turning, and he walked down into the gray the way a man walks into the sea against a current, leaning, his whole weight set against a tide that wanted the living world and did not care that he stood in the doorway. He could feel the breach above and behind him, the wound Pike had torn, and he could feel the country of the living straining toward it through the crack, the chalk and the air and the warm, breakable lives all leaning toward the cold, and he understood the physics of it the way he understood doors. That a hole in the wall of the world is not closed by pushing the two sides back together because there is nothing to push, that a hole in the wall of the world is closed by something standing in it that both sides will accept, a stitch the two countries will hold to, a seam, a thing that belongs to neither and is owed by both. There was exactly one such thing in all of existence, and it had walked in on its own feet. He went deeper because the seam was not at the lip of the wound, but at its root, down where the tear began, and the deeper he went the more the gray pressed on him, not the gentle, indifferent gray of the road he remembered, but a torn and screaming gray, a place wrenched out of truth, and he passed through it the way you walk into a gale that wants to take you off your feet, and the cold that was not his cold went into him layer by layer, and he let it, because letting it was the price of reaching the root. And he had stopped, a long time ago, on a dais under the city, being a man who would not pay a price to walk into the worst thing in the room. He reached the place where the wall should have been and was not, the raw torn root of the wound, the cold pouring past him into the world he had come from, and he set himself in it, in the gap, in the doorway he was forever locked out of, and he became the door. It is the only word for what he did, and it is not a good one because there are no good words for it, because no one had ever done it before or would again. He did not cast a spell. He had no spell for it, there was no spell for it. The thing he did was older and simpler than spellcraft. He took the two edges of the wound, the side that was the living world and the side that was the country of the dead, and he held them one in each hand, the way you hold the two sides of a tear and cloth that you mean to sew, and he made of himself the seam between them, the thing both countries would accept because he belonged to neither and was owed by both, the master of death standing in the one place in all the worlds that only he could stand. Holding the wall of reality together with the bare fact of what they had made him, and the cost of it arrived as he had known it would because the cost always arrived. To stand in the seam he had to be in both countries at once, and to be in the country of the dead at all, even in its doorway, even as its hinge was to be among them again. They were all around him in the gray. The gold lights close, closer than they had ever been, close enough to touch, his father and Sirius and Remus and Tonks and Fred laughing and Dumbledore with his untwinkling eyes, and his mother at the front of all of them, one step away, her hand already lifting toward his face. "You came back," Lily said, and it was the thing Teddy had said, the exact words, and it went through him like the wand point through the palm. "I told you that you couldn't, and you came back anyway, and now you're standing in the door holding the whole of it together, and oh, my brave boy, you found the one way in, haven't you? You found the one way you could ever come home. All you have to do is let go of the living side, let it tear. Let it all come apart and step the rest of the way through and be done, be finished, be tired at last, and I'll be right here, I'll catch you, we all will. Let go, Harry, you've held it long enough. You've held everything long enough." And here was the worst of it, the very worst, the thing the whole long road had been bending toward since an owl came down his chimney, that it was true, that he could. That if he let go of the living edge of the wound, the world he came from would come apart. The chalk and the stones and the kneeling nations who had murdered him, all of it pouring through into the cold and ending, and the wall would tear wide enough that even the master of death would be swept through it into the country he had been locked out of, and the door would finally open for him because it would no longer be a door, it would be a ruin, and a man can walk through a ruin. He could go home. The only road home that had ever existed ran straight through the destruction of everything he had walked in to save, and his mother was standing at the end of it with her hand lifting toward his face, and he was so tired, he was tired in a way that 10,000 years would not touch, and all he had to do was let go. He held on. He held the living edge of the wound in his right hand, and his mother's gold light filled his left, and he held on, and he made himself say it out loud into the gray so that he would have to hear it. "No," Harry said, "not that, whatever else, not that." "I know," his mother said, and she was weeping and she was smiling, and these had never been opposite things here. "I know, my love, I had to offer." Mother has to offer the way home, even when she knows her son won't take it, even when she'd be ashamed of him if he did. "You won't come. You'll stand in the door and hold the wall and let us go again the way you let us go in the forest, the way you've let us go your whole life, because there's a boy back there who's going to say your name on his birthday in a world full of people who don't deserve you and never did, and you'll hold the door shut against your own way home so that all of them get to keep theirs." She laid her hand against his face, and he felt it warm, the only warm thing that had reached the marrow cold since the cloth touched his face from the inside, the warmth of the country he could not enter, reaching one hand across the threshold to touch its doorkeeper. Carry it well. We're so proud of you, it's broken every heart on this shore. Now close the door, Harry. We'll be here, we'll always be here. That's the thing, you have to believe where you're going, because you won't be able to see us again, not ever, not until the very end of everything, when even your door comes down. We'll be here the whole time, every birthday, standing on the shore. Close it now. Close it and go and live the long way, the only way left to you, and know that we're waiting, and that waiting isn't the same as gone. And Harry Potter, in the doorway of the country of the dead, with his mother's warm hand on his cold face and the whole of his eternal loneliness laid out plain in front of him, did the bravest thing he had ever done, braver than walking into the forest at 17, braver than walking into the death chamber at 21, braver than letting the binding break in the court, because all of those had been him refusing to flinch from death, and this was him refusing to flinch from life, which is the harder thing. Which is the thing none of them had ever understood about him, least of all the woman who had murdered him out of fear of what he'd become. He closed the door. He brought the two edges of the wound together with himself as the seam, and he poured into the seam everything he was, all the cold and all the force and all the 10,000 years of patience he had not yet lived, and he knit the wall of the world shut from the inside, the one place it could be closed from, and as it closed the gold country slid away from him, his mother's hand drawing back across the threshold, the lights receding, the shore withdrawing into the gray, going, gone. And the last he saw of them was his mother's face turned toward him on the far side of a wall that was whole again. And then the gray took it, and the door was shut, and he was alone in the seam of the world with the warmth fading from his face, and there was only one way left to go, and it was back into the cold, into the living world, into the long way, the only way left to him. He walked back out of the wound he had become, and as the last of him cleared the threshold, the wall sealed behind him, perfect, whole 5,000 years of standing stones with no tear in the air between them, and the bottomless cold stopped pouring into the world, and the chalk stopped going gray, and the down at Wessex was only a down again, wet grass and old stones under a sky going dark. With 1,000 wizards standing on it, who had just watched the thing they came to destroy walk into the end of the world, and close it with his own body and walk back out. Pike was the last thing the breach reached for before it shut, because Pike had stood closest to it, because a man who tears the wall of the world stands by his work, and as the wound began to close, the cold caught him and dragged him toward it, his feet going out from under him on the gray-edged chalk, his hands scrabbling at nothing, and Eldon Pike, who had murdered Harry Potter out of fear and torn the world rather than be proved merciful, was pulled toward the cold he had unleashed, screaming. The careful regret long gone, only the naked terror left, the terror that had always been under everything. Harry, walking back out of the seam, saw him go. It would have been so easy. That was the thing he turned over afterward across all the years. It would have been the easiest thing in any world to keep walking, to let the breach he was closing take the man who had opened it, to let the architect of the whole long horror be swept into the cold by his own catastrophe. No blood on Harry's hands, no choice even, just the simple physics of a man standing too close to the wound he tore. No one would have called it murder. They would have called it justice and meant it, and Harry would have walked off the down with the one death he had ever been owed, clean, deserved, undeniable. He reached out as the wall sealed, and he caught Eldon Pike by the wrist, and he pulled him back from the cold, and he set him down on the solid chalk on the living side of a wall that was whole again, and he let him live. Why, Pike said when he could speak, on his hands and knees on the wet grass, staring up at the dead man who had every reason in the world to have let him fall. Why would you, after everything? I tore the world open to spite you. I would have killed all of them just to make you the villain of it. Why would you reach back for me? Because you're going to walk through a door one day, Harry said, that I'm locked out of. In 30 years and 40, when you're old in a bed the ordinary way, the way I never will. And you'll go into the warm where there's a shore and people waiting and a wall I held shut so you'd get to. I'm not going to take that from you by feeding you to the cold tonight. I won't send anyone where I can't follow, not even you, especially not you. He looked down at the ruined man on the chalk. That's your sentence, Eldon, not the cold. You're going to live a long, ordinary life, and you're going to die a long, ordinary death, free into the warm. And the whole way there you're going to know that the thing you murdered and the world you tore open reached back at the last second and gave you the one mercy it can never have for itself. Carry that. It's heavier than anything the cold could have done to you, and you'll carry it the ordinary way with an ordinary heart for the rest of an ordinary life, and that's the reckoning. Now get up. The world's watching, and it deserves to see you stand. And a little way off, Croker, the most careful man in the ministry, who had measured Harry in the chamber and found no number for him, stood among the wreckage of the working he had helped to build and watched the dead man pull the minister back from the cold. And he took out his small brass device with the pinned needle, the one that had given up trying to measure Harry's power weeks before, and he looked at it for a long moment, and then he dropped it on the chalk deliberately and did not pick it up. Because he had finally understood the thing his whole careful life had been built to avoid understanding, which is that there are things in the world that are not for measuring, that the point of them is precisely that they cannot be weighed and caged and assigned a top, and that he had spent his career building cages for the one kind of thing that should never be caged, and he left the device on the down, and he never built another instrument again as long as he lived. They did not kneel to him this time when he came back into the ring of stones, and Harry was glad of it, because the kneeling had been the worst part. The kneeling had been the Gradient's open hand. They stood. The 1,000 wizards of the nations stood on the down in the dark and watched the dead man walk out of the sealed wall of the world. And there was no working left to throw at him and no story left to tell about him, because they had all just watched the truth with their own eyes, every nation, every tradition. That the thing they could not kill or cage or move had walked into the end of the world and closed it with his own body and pulled the architect of his murder back from the cold by the wrist. There was no containing that, there was no narrative that survived it, there was only what they had seen. The supreme mugwump of the Confederation, the ancient witch with eyes like cold coins, who had brought the gathered will of every nation on earth to this down to push one man out of the world, came forward across the broken ring on her own 2 feet and stopped a careful distance from him. And she did not kneel because he had asked them not to, but she bowed slowly, the deep formal bow that her people gave to the great forces of the world, to mountains and to storms and to the sea. The bow that is not submission but acknowledgement, the recognition of a thing that is simply larger than the language of power. And one by one in the dark, the delegations of the nations did the same, not kneeling, only bowing, and then they began quietly to disperse, each of them carrying home across every border on earth the one story that no working could ever contain. That there had been a thing the whole world could not kill, and that it had chosen with the world at its mercy to be merciful, and that this, and not the dying, was the part they should be afraid of forgetting. Hermione was standing at the central instrument, and she had stopped trying to work it because there was nothing left to work, and she watched Harry come toward her across the broken ring with the chalk-dark sky behind him, and her exhausted face was wet, and when he reached her she did the thing she had not done since the day she first decided he was worth saving from a troll, which was to look at him with no sums in her eyes at all. "I was wrong," Hermione said. It cost her everything to say it, he could see what it cost. She had built her whole self on being right, on doing the sums no one else was brave enough to do, and she stood on the down and set it down. Not about the gradient's real, but about you, about the one variable, the one I left out because including it would have stopped me. I ran your best self and I said your best self loses too, and I was wrong because I never ran this. I never ran the self that walks into the end of the world to save the people who murdered him and then reaches back for the worst of them at the last second. That self doesn't lose, Harry. That self can't lose because losing would mean becoming the thing I was afraid of, and I just watched you have the whole world at your feet and the door home one step away and the easiest justice in history hanging off your own wrist, and you refused all three in front of everyone in one night. My sum said that was impossible. You spent a fortnight being impossible. Her voice broke. I don't know how to hold being this wrong. I murdered you over a number and the number was wrong and you're standing in front of me having just saved the world that backed me and I don't know how a person lives inside being this wrong. The same way Ron does, Harry said. The same way Robards does, the same way Pike's going to have to. You don't get a punishment from me, Hermione. You never were going to. You get the rest of your life and a daughter coming and the truth, all of it to live inside. And you get one thing the others don't because you earned it, because you were the only one who ever loved me enough to do the sums and brave enough to act on them and honest enough at the end to stand on a hill and say you got them wrong. He held her eyes. You get to be the one who tells it, the true version. You're going to spend your life making sure the world remembers exactly what happened here, all of it. The murder and the return and the reckoning and the door I held shut, so that the next time a frightened clever person sits down to do the sums on someone too powerful to check, they'll have your account in front of them, and they'll read about a fortnight in which the most powerful thing that ever lived was offered the world 3 times in one night and said no, and maybe, they'll run the variable you left out. That's your work now, not building doors, telling the truth about the one you built and what it cost. It's harder than the building, you'll be good at it, you were always good at the hard things. Hermione Granger looked at him for a long moment, and then she nodded once the way she nodded when she had been given a problem worth her whole life. And Harry understood that he had given her the one thing that could let her live inside being that wrong, which was a reason to, which was the only mercy that had ever worked on her, the same as Ron's daughter and Robard's warning and Pike's long, ordinary death, not punishment which ends, but purpose which doesn't. What are you going to do? Hermione said. Now there's nothing in the world that can stop you. You've proven it to everyone. You could take all of it. You could fix all of it. You could. I'm going to leave, Harry said. That's the whole of it. I'm not going to rule you and I'm not going to fix you because a thing that can't be checked shouldn't be trusted to fix anything. You taught me that. You were right about that. You were right about almost everything except the one part that mattered. I'm going to step out of it. No throne, no order, no benevolent hand on the world. You'll govern yourselves badly the way people do and make your own mistakes, and I won't be in the room because I've learned what gets decided in rooms I'm allowed to be the most powerful thing in. I'll be out at the edges, watching, not ruling. Just there the way the sea is there, so that the next Pike who sits down to murder someone for the greater good remembers that the last thing that was murdered for the greater good walked back out of the veil, and that being too frightened to lose is the surest way there is to make the thing you're afraid of. He almost smiled and did not, because smiling was a thing for men who could still be surprised. Tell them that in your true account. Tell them the force the world couldn't contain decided the kindest thing it could do with infinite power was to refuse to use it. See if they can hold 2 ideas that big at once. Some of them will, that's enough. It only ever takes some of them. And he turned and he walked out of the ring of standing stones, alone on his own feet. The way he had walked into every worst thing and every door since an owl came down his chimney. And the thousand wizards of the nations parted in front of him and closed behind him and did not try to stop him, because there was nothing left in any of them that believed he could be stopped, and nothing left that wanted to. And the last they saw of him was a thin dark-haired figure in a plain coat walking out across the dark down toward the edge of the world, getting smaller, not vanishing, just going the way the most powerful thing that had ever lived goes when it has decided in front of everyone to want nothing. The years did what years do, which is to pass and to take and to leave the one who cannot be taken standing in the hedge. Harry kept to the edges as he had said he would. He was seen now and then across the long decades by the people who knew to look, a figure on a far rise when the wards of a school were threatened, a stranger in a plain coat at the back of a hard funeral, a cold, clean wind that turned a dark working aside at the moment it should have caught. He never ruled. He never sat in a room where a vote was held. The wizarding world governed itself, badly and then better and then badly again, the way people do, and it made its own mistakes and its own mercies. And twice in 100 years a frightened clever person sat down to do the sums on someone too powerful to check. And twice they found in the true account a woman named Granger had spent her life making sure survived, the story of a fortnight on a chalk down, and twice they put their wands down and tried instead to talk. And that was worth more than any throne Harry could have taken, and it was the only monument he ever wanted and the only one he got. Centuries folded over centuries. The ministry that had murdered him fell the way ministries do, and another rose in its place, and that one fell too, and the standing stones on the down at Wessex were fenced and studied and forgotten and rediscovered, and through all of it the account a woman named Granger had written outlived the woman and the stone and the fence. Children read it in schools that had not existed when she wrote it. Scholars argued over which parts were true and decided, wrongly, that most of it was legend because the alternative was harder to carry. And once, long after everyone who could have remembered his face had gone through the door, a young witch with too much power and no one able to check her sat alone in a library at the end of a frightened century, reading the old account by wanlight, and came to the part where the most powerful thing that ever lived stood with the whole world at its feet and chose to want nothing. And she closed the book and sat a long while in the dark, and did not do the thing she had come to the library to talk herself into. She never knew that a cold, clean wind moved through the stacks behind her as she sat, or that the figure who had turned aside 100 dark workings across 100 quiet centuries had paused once to read over the shoulder of a stranger, and found, in her closing of the book, the only thanks he had ever wanted or would ever be given. He went to the cottage on the boy's birthday every year and stood in the hedge, and did not go in again because the 1 hour had been the gift and a second would have been a theft. He watched Teddy turn 5 and 8 and 11 with a trunk and an owl and his mother's restless hair gone a nervous, excited green. He watched him go to Hogwarts and make trouble the good kind. He watched him grow tall and gentle, his father in the shape of him and his mother in the changing of his face. And every single year on the morning of his birthday somewhere in the world, the grown boy stopped whatever he was doing and said one word out loud, just one, to no one anyone else could see. And 1,000 miles away the cold thing in the hedge heard it every time, and that was the thread Harry held the long centuries by, the one word a year, Harry. A tether thin as a spider's line and stronger than every binding the nations had ever forged, because it was freely given and asked for nothing back. He broke his own rule once, only once in all the centuries, and it was for Teddy at the end. The boy was an old man by then, 90 and more, the restless hair gone white and still at last, and he was dying the ordinary way in a bed with his children and his grandchildren around him. And somewhere in the long night when the others had gone to sleep in their chairs, Teddy Lupin opened his eyes and found, sitting at the edge of his bed, a thin dark-haired man in a plain coat who had not aged a single day in 90 years and who he had known, since he was old enough to understand the truth behind the journey, would come, because his godfather had promised to be listening. And a man who is listening hears the last birthday too. "You came back," Teddy said in the cracked voice of the very old, and he smiled, the same tremendous satisfaction he had smiled at of the young at being proved right against the foolish certainty of adults, except that he was the oldest thing in the room now and Harry was the youngest, and the joke of it, the long, unbearable joke, hung in the dim room between them. "I told you I'd be listening," Harry said. 90 birthdays, I heard every one." "I'm going on a journey," Teddy said, and his old eyes were wet and unafraid. Longer than any I've been on, and I need you to be very brave about it, braver than you've ever been." He had turned the words around, the words from the rug, the words from the cushioned castle, and he gave them back to his godfather across 90 years, the last gift of a dying old man to the one mourner who would never be able to follow him. "You'll have to let me think you'll be all right. Not whatever the true word is, all right, you'll have to mean it kindly. Can you do that for me, Harry? Can you let me go thinking you'll be all right?" And Harry Potter, who had refused the world 3 times in one night, who had closed the door of death with his own body and held it shut for 100 years, sat at the edge of an old man's deathbed and did the hardest thing of all the hard things, which was to look his godson in the eye and lie, gently, kindly, the way Andromeda had taught him to lie to a 4-year-old a century before. "I'll be all right, Ted," he said, and his voice came out level, and he was proud of that, the way he had been proud on the dais and at the cushioned castle, that at the last goodbye that would ever matter his voice came out level. "I've got the edges of the world to mind and a style to check and your name to listen for, except," and here the level voice nearly failed him and he made it hold. Except there won't be a next birthday will there, so I'll have to find a new thing to listen for. Don't worry about that part's mine to carry, you just go on your journey, you grew up good, Teddy. The gentlest brave man I ever knew, just like your dad, you did the whole job. There's a shore where you're going and your mum's on it and your dad and they've been waiting 90 years to tell you so themselves. Go on, I'll hold the door. I'll always hold the door, that's my job and I'm good at it. Teddy Lupin closed his eyes, still smiling, and a little before dawn he walked through the door Harry could not pass, into the warm, onto the shore where his mother could change her face to make him laugh and his father had been saving up 90 years of things to say. And Harry sat at the edge of the empty bed until the light came up gray in the window, and then he stood and went back to the edges of the world, and that was the last time he ever let himself go in. Because the 1 hour with the living boy had been a gift, and the 1 hour with the dying old man had been a wound, and a man who cannot die has to learn the difference and learn it for keeps. Luna had gone before Teddy years before. He had come to her when her hair had gone white and her strange clear eyes had not changed at all, and she was sitting on the same stile as though she had been waiting, as though they had arranged it, and she patted the rail beside her and he sat, and she reached over with a hand gone soft and spotted with age and pressed it flat against his chest over the place where the storm was, the way she had on the first night, the way she had made him promise she could. Still there, she said, and her relief was the same real thing it had been 70 years before. You kept it the whole time, all of it. I knew you would, but it's nice to be sure. She left her hand there a moment. I'm going soon, Harry. Through the door I can feel it, the way you feel a tune coming to its end. And I want you to do something for me, the way Teddy says your name. When I've gone, you come here to this stile on the day every year and you put your own hand where mine is now and you check yourself that it's still there. Because I won't be able to check it for you anymore and somebody has to and it can't be no one. Promise me you'll check. I'll outlive the stile, Luna, Harry said. I'll outlive the hill. 1 year I'll come and there won't be anywhere to sit. Then check standing up, Luna said, unafraid, the way she had met every true and terrible thing for 90 years. Honestly, you'd think infinity would make a person less fussy about the furniture. And she smiled at him, the strange luminous smile that had comforted dying men in a war a lifetime ago. And not long after that she walked through the door into the warm, onto the shore where his mother was. And Harry came back to the stile on the day every year after and put his own hand flat on his own chest and checked the way she had made him promise. And every year for longer than the language had numbers for, he found it still there, the warm thing, the small buried ache. The faces changed and changed again. Ron went through the door in the fullness of an ordinary life, having raised a daughter who, knowing all of it, the freezing and the failing and the 2 words said into the dark, decided he was worth loving anyway, which was the only verdict that had ever mattered, the one Harry had told him to wait 18 years for and which he had earned across 40 more. Hermione went, old and clear-eyed, having spent 60 years telling the truth until the truth outlived the fear, her account the thing the world reached for whenever it was tempted to murder someone for the greater good. Robards went, the warning he had become outliving the soldier he had been. And Pike went last of all of them, old in a bed the ordinary way, free into the warm, carrying to the very threshold the weight of a mercy he could never repay, and Harry stood in the hedge for that one too because he had promised the man a witness to the door he'd been given back. And Harry Potter kept his promises, all of them, across all the centuries, because they were the only things he had left that did not melt in his hands. One by one the whole world he had known walked through the door he held shut for them, into the country he had been locked out of, where a shore waited and a mother stood, and one by one he watched them go and stayed and did not arrive. And on the last birthday, the one when there was no one left alive who had ever known him, when even Teddy's grandchildren's grandchildren had gone through the door and the one word had not been said aloud in 100 years, Harry Potter stood on a rise above a valley that no longer held a cottage, in a coat that was no longer plain because there were no plain coats anymore, the most powerful thing that had ever lived in the loneliest, and he put his own hand flat against his own chest and he checked. It was still there, the warm thing, the small buried ache. He had kept it, through all of it, against all of it, for longer than the world had words. He had been left for dead and risen as a force the world could not contain, and the world had thrown its dead and its bindings and its whole gathered will against him and made him only larger, and he had stood at the end of everything and closed the door with his own body and reached back for the worst of them at the last. And through 10,000 years of cold and silence and windows going dark, he had kept the one small warm thing a strange girl had pressed his hand to on the first night and told him to keep. And that in the end was the whole of the victory and the whole of the cost, and there was no one left to tell it to, and so he told it to the wind, the way he had told everything to the wind since there had stopped being anyone else. Still here, Harry said, to the empty rise, to the cold in his marrow, to the door that would open for him at last only at the end of everything, when even his wall came down and his mother would be standing on the shore exactly where she had promised. Still here. And he lowered his hand and turned and walked on into the endless time, the only way left to him, carrying it well. Chapter 7 End.